back again, are we? You must have a taste for the terrifying. Tonight, we'll explore a story so chilling, it'll make you second-guess every shadow that creeps in your home. Very few people experience something so traumatizing at a young age that it sticks with them forever. I'm one of those people. I was maybe 6 or 7 years old. My older brother and I grew up in a broken household. Our mom raised us, our dad was a deadbeat and disappeared out of our lives. Our mom worked 2 jobs to provide for us. She'd sometimes have to work night shifts and would usually have our grandma stay at the house on nights that she had to work. My brother Chump is 2 years older than me. We were fortunate enough to have our own bedrooms given the circumstances. We lived in a small house, but for the 3 of us and on our mom's dime alone, it wasn't terrible. The area in which we lived wasn't amazing, though. It was a night like any other. I can't remember if it was a school night or if it was a weekend. I don't remember any tiny details like that, but what I do remember is I was in the living room with my grandma. My grandma was watching TV, and I was playing with Legos on my Lego table. I was being loud and making a mess with them because I remember my grandma kept saying, "Rock, quiet down." Chump was already in bed. My bedtime was 9:30, given that it was probably approaching that time. I'm guessing this was a weekend night, otherwise, my bedtime would have been earlier. The layout of the house was simple: living room, dining room, and kitchen are all connected, and then there was a hallway which led to the bathroom and 3 bedrooms. Our mom's bedroom was at the end of the hall, mine was in the middle. Our grandma would sleep in our mom's bed when she'd stay over to watch us. Eventually, I had to go to sleep. My grandma would always go to sleep early too, so right after saying good night to me, she would go to the bathroom to brush her teeth and stuff before going to sleep as well. I was never one to be afraid of the dark or anything. My mom says I used to be a really brave child. But that night, I woke up in the middle of the night, something unusual for me because I remember myself being a very heavy sleeper. I heard something outside in the hallway, creaks in the floor. The wood floors in that house were always very creaky. Anytime someone walked down the hall, you'd hear it. I thought my grandma was going to the bathroom. However, the creaking didn't stop. It sounded like the creaks were moving back and forth. I got out of bed and went to the door to listen. Now, I heard whispering. I was more confused than anything. I thought my grandma was talking to Chump. I opened the door and looked into the hallway, and what I saw still haunts me. There was a tall, naked, skinny woman leaning on the wall with her head between her arms. She was whispering stuff to herself, and then, like a deer in headlights, her head whipped around to look at me. I screamed for my grandma like a little girl and slammed my door shut. There were pounds on my door, and the woman on the other side was screaming a name, "Bonnie, Bonnie, open the door." I kept screaming as loud as I could for my grandma, and I heard her scream in the hallway. I distinctly remember my grandma screaming, "Get the out of here." The woman screamed, "Where is Bonnie?" My grandma was in her mid-60s at the time, and she was still pretty quick. She yelled at me to keep my door locked, and she managed to fend off this crazy woman as she also called the police at the same time. I don't know how she did it, but my grandma was one tough woman. The woman left the house screaming, "Bonnie," and after locking the door, my grandma came to hug both me and Chump, who was awake and also crying from the commotion. We all sat huddled together until the police came. By that time, my grandma told us to just go back to sleep. This simply was a matter of my grandma not locking one of the doors, mixed with living in an already shady area. That woman had to be on crack or something. Seeing what I saw at such a young age did a number on me. I couldn't sleep alone for a long time. It was this incident that really resulted in us moving out of that house not long after. Around 8 years ago, I moved out of my mom's house into my first apartment in the city of Chicago. The place was a nice 3-bedroom apartment on the south side of the city in a friendly neighborhood by the University of Illinois. I lived with 2 roommates, Patrick and Kelsey. Kelsey was a good friend of mine, while Patrick was a good friend of Kelsey's who I had not met prior, although we ended up getting along just fine. One night, about a month after moving in, I met up with a few friends of mine for drinks at a bar more in the center of the city, around 15 minutes from my place. It was a good time, and I ended up getting slightly drunk before getting into a cab at 1 a.m. and heading home. Upon walking into my apartment, I noticed that Patrick's door was open, showing that he was staying at his girlfriend's place, while Kelsey's door was closed with the light from his TV shining underneath the crack. I made my way to my bedroom and put on my own TV before lying down to prepare for sleep. After around 10 minutes, I heard my doorbell ring. Half asleep, I woke up, confused as it was 1:30 in the morning, so I ignored it. A few seconds later, the doorbell rang again, and then again a few seconds after that. It's important to mention that my roommate Kelsey had a good amount of side cash by dealing weed to a few people. He was also a huge stoner himself, so the idea that he fell asleep while waiting for a late-night customer to come over was not out of the realm of possibility. With this in mind, I went over to my intercom and asked who was there. A girl's voice answered back, "It's Kaylee. I'm here to see Kelsey." Thinking that my suspicions had been confirmed, I exited out of my front door and headed down the stairs. The door to the outside of our apartment building was made of tall glass, so you could easily identify any potential visitors. Here, I saw an attractive college-age blonde girl with glasses waiting patiently outside. I had never seen this person before, however, she appeared to be non-threatening. Besides having random customers over to grab weed, Kelsey would also have some random girls over to hook up with from time to time. Because of this, I let my guard down slightly and cracked the door open. The girl then repeated what she had said moments earlier over the intercom, "Hi, I'm here to see Kelsey." I replied, "Okay, he's here. Just follow me up," and I held the door open for her. She grabbed the handle, and I turned around to head back up the stairs. As I was walking back up, I quickly noticed that this Kaylee girl was not following me up. I glanced over my shoulder and saw that she was still standing outside holding the door open, only now she was staring off to her right, almost as if waiting for someone. At this moment, a tidal wave of fear crashed over me as I realized something horrible was more than likely about to happen. I continued walking up to my place, quicker now. After turning the corner of the stairs, I heard the door swing open and then heavy footsteps running up the stairs behind me. I looked over my shoulder again, and what I saw shook me to my core. A tall, gangly man with sunken-in eyes and greasy long hair down to his shoulders was running up the stairs straight at me. He was wearing a sleeveless black t-shirt, and apart from the cheap-looking tribal tattoos I saw creeping up his arms, I noticed he was also holding what looked like a lead pipe in his right hand. At this moment, my body shot full of adrenaline as I turned around and raced back up the stairs and into my apartment. I turned around to close the door and saw the man, who was now only a few feet from entering my apartment, the pipe over his head. With less than a second to spare, I slammed the door and locked it in one swift motion. Immediately after, I heard the thud of the pipe hit my door. I stood facing the now closed door, paralyzed, as the man hit the door 3 more times while shouting obscenities at me. He eventually gave up and ran down the stairs and out the front door. I ran into Kelsey's room to wake him up. After telling him what exactly had just gone down, he responded by telling me that, yes, he knew a blonde girl named Kaylee, only he had just met her earlier the same day. Apparently, while I was out with my friends, the doorbell rang while Kelsey was home alone. Instead of going down to let her in himself, Kelsey buzzed her up after just hearing her name, thinking she was a friend of mine. When she reached the door to our unit, he opened it and let her in. He said it seemed like she was confused, mentioning that she was looking for someone named Felix. Kelsey responded by saying his own name and that no one named Felix lived here. He mentioned she stayed near the entrance of the unit and kept reaching behind her to make sure the door stayed open before leaving only a few moments later. After hearing this, my theory is that these same people came earlier in the day and, not expecting to have someone just let them up through the buzzer, the girl made the mistake of forgetting to keep the door to the building open, rendering the attacker unable to enter during this first attempt. Either way, we both got extremely lucky that night. We did call the police, who arrived and asked for more information about what happened. They asked if there was anyone we knew who might want to do us harm, and we answered no, which was the truth, as this seemed to be a completely random attack. The cops left soon after, saying that there was nothing much they could do. We never saw that Kaylee girl or her scumbag partner again. This story happened to me 4 years ago when I was in my mid-22s. This whole experience will probably scar me for life, and it's still vividly imprinted in my mind. The day was the 17th of June, and I had the house to myself because my parents were on a 2-week vacation in France. It was sometime after dusk, probably around 9 p.m., and the weather was scorchingly hot. Believe me when I say I was sweating my ass off with just my tank top and shorts on. The heat was so unbearable that I allowed in some fresh air, opening all the living room and bedroom windows, planning on closing them right before hitting the hay. Now, before fast-forwarding, I must mention that I was feeling extremely exhausted. On that same day, I had taken 3 exams in the morning and played a volleyball match in the afternoon. Thus, once I ate my dinner while browsing social media in my room, I collapsed into bed without even realizing it. I woke up at around 3 a.m. to the muffled sounds of thunderbolts and a draft of cold fresh air hitting my face. A strong wind was blowing, and all the shutters left open were noisily banging. Still drowsy, I flicked on the lamp, but the light wouldn't turn on. I checked the plug using my phone flashlight, but everything was fine. I begrudgingly climbed out of bed and looked out my bedroom window. There were menacing rainy black clouds on the horizon. A typical late-night summer storm was approaching. Given that every lamp post on the street was off, I instantly knew there had been a blackout. Phone flashlight in hand, I dizzily headed down the hallway to shut the windows before rain started pouring down. When I got to the last window, though, I noticed the mosquito net lifted up. This struck me as weird since I was quite positive I hadn't left it that way. Getting a little paranoid, I turned behind me to shine the flashlight around the living room and check my surroundings. The furniture was still in place, no drawers or closet doors left open, no decorative objects missing or moved into unfamiliar positions. Everything seemed normal. I briefly peeked my head out of my window to look outside. Trees were swaying in the howling wind, leaves shaking in a frenzy, a powerful display of nature's force, but still nothing remotely suspicious. Maybe the mechanism is faulty, or the strong wind somehow pushed it up. Against my better judgment, I convinced myself it was useless to lose sleep over it. Feeling relieved, I closed the shutters and started walking back to my bedroom, eager to get a decent night's rest. Little did I know that night would be anything but pleasant. I happened to casually turn my head to the flight of stairs connected to the attic when a vivid burst of light flashing from up there caught my eyes. I paid no mind. The attic was adorned with huge glass windows, so it was no wonder to see light spreading across the room. It was probably sheet lightning. I kept walking, subconsciously waiting for the thunder to come, but it never did. I stopped in my tracks. Given that the flash I saw was powerful and bright, the lightning had to be pretty close, so why couldn't any rumbling noise be heard? I started to think maybe it wasn't lightning. What if it was a flashlight? As doubt crept in, my heart began to race. I quickly put 2 and 2 together, and now the strange occurrence of the mosquito net left up made much more sense. The nightmarish realization hit me that an intruder could have broken into my house. At first, I panicked. Did they hear me shutting the windows? Were they carrying any weapons? Did they plan on just robbing my house, or did they also have worse intentions? Normally, I would call my parents to deal with it, but since they were away, it was all on me now. While those sickening thoughts were swirling in my mind, the distinct sound of a doorknob being twisted and turned made me instantly snap out of my catatonic state. I shot my head to face the living room entrance, and through the glass frame, I spotted a shadowy figure just a few inches outside of the front door. There was a person standing there, most likely an accomplice of the guy upstairs. Words are not enough to describe how powerless and defenseless I felt. Despite the overwhelming fear, I did my best to keep my cool, trying to make as little noise as possible. I tiptoed in the direction of the stairs leading down to the basement, which was directly connected to the garage. I figured I could safely escape from there. While I was making my descent down, still using my phone as a source of light, I dialed 911. Speaking as softly as possible, I informed the operator about what just happened. He tried to calm me down and reassured me that the police would be there in less than 10 minutes. He also added that I should lock myself in a safe room and wait for the officers to show up. I was about to reply that I could easily sneak outside through the garage door when, all of a sudden, I lost the call. I immediately checked the phone and realized that down there, I had no signal. As if that wasn't enough, I also noticed the battery was almost dead. Once I reached the basement, I nervously assessed what to do. I could try and find an emergency flashlight, but now I was so close to escaping from the house that I didn't want to waste time rummaging through the drawers. Besides, I was mindful that the intruders upstairs could have heard me. In the heat of the moment, I exited the basement as fast as I could. Nonetheless, while making my way towards the garage door, I got a feeling in my gut telling me I was being watched. I don't even know why. Maybe my sixth sense had picked up on something, but I pointed my phone to illuminate the back seats of my car. And there he was, a man's face stuck to the rear-view mirror. A disgusting, revolting face with dead, bulging wide eyes and a malicious yellowish grin spreading across its cheeks. He kept staring at me so intently it almost looked like he was piercing into my soul. He slid his dirty hand against the glass, waving me hello in an unnaturally slow motion. At that point, it happened. My phone battery died, turning off the flashlight and leaving me in total darkness. I felt my heart in my throat. I had never been more scared in my entire life. My whole body was quivering and shaking in fear. When I heard the car door opening, I lost it. I screamed. I screamed like a little girl as I somehow managed to unlock the garage door and bolt outside, climbing up the driveway ramp. By that time, heavy rain had started pouring down. I hopped over the gate and ran to the nearest house, yelling like a lunatic for the neighbors to rush outside. They came out in shock, and I explained to them the whole situation, almost out of breath and soaking wet. In the meantime, I heard sirens in the distance. 2 police cars rolled down the street, and I practically ran into the officer's arms, screaming that there were 3 strangers in my house. 4 agents went into my house, guns drawn, while another one took my description of the events. Those 3 men were all gone, though, and to this day, I don't think they've ever been caught. Some antiques which held some value were stolen, however. I must say it was no big deal for my family. For the remainder of the night, I couldn't sleep at all. I kept tossing and turning, jumping at the slightest sounds, ruminating relentlessly on the horrific experience. But I kid you not, another chilling surprise was lying in wait. When morning came, I spotted a small piece of paper sticking out of the edge of my bed. I picked it up and went frozen stiff. The following words were written: "Bye-bye beauty, you look cute when you sleep." Let me give you some context before the story begins. When I was 18 years old, I lived a pretty normal life. I had just finished high school the year before the story takes place. I had always been one for horror, anything, whether it was movies, games, jump scares, you name it, and I loved it. I never seemed to be afraid of anything, and I loved that it allowed me to go and do things that made me appear tougher to girls who I was interested in at the time or who were interested in me. I thought of it almost like a superpower. My friend had always talked about this REM-induced real-life nightmare called sleep paralysis. I, however, had never experienced such a thing. My friend Ellie suffered from extreme lucid dreaming. She explained to me several times about how certain stimulators or outside factors could play into her dreams and mold them into what could potentially be a heavenly experience full of fun and wonder, or could just as easily turn into a bone-chilling nightmare straight out of hell. Being the light sleeper I am, I saw no chance of it occurring, so I kind of just let it go right over my head. One night, Ellie texted me and asked me to come over as she had just suffered another so-called evil experience due to her sleep condition. When I arrived, I found her asleep again, seemingly peacefully. I took a seat on her stool that she had for her makeup dresser right by the window and started playing a game on my phone. 30 minutes or so went by, and I figured she was peacefully asleep and it would probably be okay for me to leave as long as I let her know that I stopped by as she requested. But suddenly, Ellie awoke and started screaming. This was a different kind of scream, though, a type of scream I had never heard before, especially from her. It was almost mumbled, I don't know how else to describe it. Her eyes bulged open, and I ran over to her side. I asked her if she was having a bad dream. She started shaking. I grabbed a hold of her to try to calm her down, but the tremors grew. I asked her what was going on, but no response. I figured this was just another one of her so-called sleep paralysis episodes. I did my best to comfort her. After about 40 or so seconds went by, she regained full control of her body. I made sure she was okay and then left to go back to my house, as it was almost 2 o'clock in the morning. Right as I got home, I received a very panicked text reading, "The hallucinations won't stop." I asked her to clarify what she meant, but no response. After about 20 minutes went by, I took it upon myself to head back over to her place. When I arrived, I noticed the illumination of red and blue covering her front porch and the surrounding road signs. I ran up to her house, desperately trying to find out what happened. As I approached the house, I noticed Ellie was speaking with one of the officers on the scene. When I went up to talk to her, Ellie and the officer walked me over to a more secluded area. What I found out still sends chills up my spine to this day. Apparently, when I had gone over to Ellie's that night, she wasn't asleep at all, she was pretending to be. Evidently, right behind me was a tall, skinny homeless man hiding in her closet. The police had also found a very large kitchen knife on him as well. The theory to this day is Ellie thought she was having an episode when, in reality, this very real man was quietly creeping towards her in her bedroom. Supposedly, when I had entered her house, it was enough to spook the man into hiding, and my presence was enough to keep him hidden. This gave Ellie the time to call 911 and report the situation, which in turn resulted in the police arriving almost immediately after I had left. Thankfully, the man was taken into custody rather quickly. To this day, I don't know what to think about that night, other than that I could have very easily saved her life simply by keeping her company during what I thought was a very stressful situation. This, in turn, could have resulted in some very scary and heinous acts that would have taken place if I had been there any later. I hope I never experience such a thing. That would be what finally trips my fear factor without a doubt. Way back when I was a teenager, my friend's house was broken into. My mom was out of town, and I was at my friend Acer's house. We lived in a middle-class to upper-class neighborhood in the suburbs. Nothing super fancy, just a pretty average American home. All the houses looked similar in design, and they all had the same cookie-cutter, average-sized yard. Friend Acer lived right down the street, and I wanted to hang out over there and sleep over because I didn't like to stay home alone at night, and my mom wasn't really sure if I was ready for it yet either. Quite frankly, I was 11 years old, and I was a pretty shy and timid kid that was always sucked into the Xbox. I didn't play sports, and my dad wasn't in the picture very much. I was kind of a mama's boy, as embarrassing as that is to admit, but it's the truth. I was scared to stay home alone for a whole night. It was okay, though, because Acer's parents let me sleep over. Acer's parents, Beck and Irina, were really cool. It was a Saturday night, and they were also having company over. They were grilling out and having some drinks by the fire while Acer and I and a few of his younger cousins ran around the yard, playing catch, jumping on the trampoline, and swimming in their pool. After a few hours of being kids and bouncing off the walls, we grew tired, so we hung out inside for a bit. Then eventually, we made our way outside for an hour or so to hang out with the adults until our curfew came up. I would say around 11 o'clock, his parents made us go inside to get ready for bed. They put a movie on for all of us kids in the basement, and we set up a bunch of sleeping bags. We were watching some random movie, I don't remember what it was, but after a while, I fell asleep. I'm a light sleeper, so it wasn't a surprise when I woke up to one of the doors creeping open in the basement, along with some heavy footsteps, which sounded like they were coming from the stairs. I lifted my head up to see what was going on, but I couldn't see much. It was really dark down there, and I figured it was one of Acer's little cousins maybe just using the restroom or something, so I laid back down. I rolled over and went back to sleep, but within a matter of minutes, I woke to a pounding sound. I couldn't tell what the banging noise was, but I could tell it was coming from behind us, towards the stairs. Acer's basement was a decent size, and we were in the living room part of it, but on the other side, there was a bar and like 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. I thought the noise was coming from downstairs, but I wasn't totally sure. I thought that it might have been one of the adults and that maybe they were just grabbing something from downstairs, so I tried to close my eyes again. It was really dark down there, and I didn't expect it to be a stranger either. That, or I thought that maybe one of the adults went to the restroom as well. I didn't have a phone, so I couldn't check the time or get a hold of anyone. I wasn't really sure I needed to anyways. I sat and listened for a while, though, and I couldn't hear the adults outside partying anymore. Maybe they were done for the night and coming in to check on us, I thought. You remember when you were a kid and thought there were monsters under your bed or in the closet? That fear you would feel, but deep down, you knew there was nothing to be scared about because you knew it wasn't real. Kind of felt like that. I went back to sleep one more time, but this time, what happened was far more disturbing than the previous times I'd been woken up. I woke up to a man on top of me, shaking me and trying to grab me. Other kids and Acer all ran to get the adults for help. I put up a fight, but eventually, the strange man grabbed me full on and started to run. I was being kidnapped. I did everything I could to try to get away, kicking, biting, scratching, and I even tried to dig my fingers through the man's eyes, but nothing was working. I was hopeless. That is, until Acer's dad chased him down and hit him in the head with a fire extinguisher. We both fell straight to the ground on the sidewalk, and I hit my head on the cement. Somehow, the man managed to stand up and run away, and since he had a mask on, we had no way of identifying him. I wonder if things would have ended differently had the other adults been there still. Maybe they would have chased the man down and beat his ass, and he would have got arrested, and I could actually sleep at night. But for the longest of times, I couldn't sleep. The same nightmare came to me over and over and would replay in my head. We think that the man let himself inside through the sliding glass door in the basement. I wonder how long he was standing there, planning the attack. If I would have listened to my gut, maybe things would have turned out differently, but I actually ended up with a concussion anyway. Nothing too severe, but still a concussion. Ever since that day, no matter what it is, I always listen to my intuition, and I suggest you do the same. It's always better to be safe than sorry, believe me. I'm also really glad that Acer's parents were still awake, or maybe I would have been murdered or kidnapped or even worse. My family and I used to go camping all the time, sometimes more than 3 or 4 times a year, even. We were camping in White Mountain National Forest, and it was our first time doing a more primitive type of camp. Usually, we went to traditional campsites like Yogi Bear Jellystone or even KOA, but this time we were in for something different. I wasn't that excited for it because I didn't think it would be as fun. I think I was 14 when this happened, around that age at least. I was still in an angsty teenage phase, if you will. I was still a good kid, just a little emotional and rough around the edges. When we got there, while my parents were setting up, my little brother and I wanted to do some exploring. We walked around for a while, but we didn't go too far as we didn't know the area and we didn't want to get lost or stray too far from camp. We talked about anything you would imagine 2 unsupervised children would talk about. I started messing with my little brother, Blair, saying things like we were lost and to watch out for the bears and the monsters. Pretty crappy, I know, but I thought it was funny. We messed with each other like that all the time, but I could tell he was actually starting to get scared, so I let him know I was only joking. I was hoping to find a cool bank offshore, like a place we could swim or fish. I found the perfect spot. He ran over to it to investigate it, and I fell in love with the scenery. It truly was beautiful. Our little kid brains loved every second of the outdoors. I knew we had been gone a while, though, and I was in charge of my brother, and I didn't want us to get in trouble. Mom wanted us back before dark anyway, and we were starting to lose daylight. So, we walked back to camp, had dinner, and did our nightly ritual with the family, like playing board games. We had a campfire and all that fun stuff until eventually, it was time for bed. Blair and I were staying in our own tent, while our mom and dad had their own as well. We got our sleeping bags, a lantern, and not much of anything else, maybe some snacks that we snuck into our tent and a DVD player to watch a movie. I fell asleep, but I remember waking up for seemingly no reason in a groggy state of mind. I turned over towards Blair and noticed he was gone. I instantly shot up. I walked out of the tent and saw him walking towards the trail that we came from earlier. "Blair, what are you doing?" I asked. "Get back to sleep before Dad finds out what you're doing." That was when I heard a noise coming from my parents' tent. I worried that I woke them up by basically yelling. I don't know how Blair got out of the tent without me noticing in the first place, but he kept walking until eventually, he was out of my sight. I ended up finding him off the trail a ways, thanks to my lantern, and he was sitting by the lake. I grabbed him by the arm and yanked him towards camp when all of a sudden, we saw a shadow. It was a man, and there was something really wrong with him. Like, seriously. He wasn't only just being a creep by staring at us, but he was clearly deranged. He was standing in the moonlight, and I could see him semi-clearly. He had long, dark hair that looked greasy and a creepy mustache. He also had some sort of tool in his hand that looked like a hammer. The way he was just standing there, all crusty-looking and staring intensely, showed me enough. He was just sitting there, mouth breathing, and he was extremely pale. He looked like he hadn't showered in weeks. I didn't stay for another second or even bother to say a word to him. I mean, come on, I was pretty sure he was a murderer. Now the chase was on. Blair wasn't as fast as me and he could barely keep up. Keep in mind, he was only 9 or 10, so his little legs could only go so fast. I grabbed his arm and practically dragged him to make him go faster. The other problem that we had was we had to get past this man to get back to camp, so we legit had to make a detour and run in a circle around him. I don't know what we would have done if it wasn't dark or if we weren't already close to home. We were pretty sure that we lost him and eventually met up with Mom and Dad. They found us out a ways from camp. I guess we were heading in the wrong direction. We kind of got lost in the panic, I guess. You'll never guess what happened after that. When we arrived back at camp, my dad's truck was gone, the only vehicle that we had out there. That man baited us off camp and he stole the truck, broke into our tents, and stole my dad's wallet and phone. Luckily, we had a walkie-talkie to call for help. The police found my dad's truck and actually arrested the man a few days later. What if we would have been out further into the woods that night? That man would have been out further into the woods that night. That man would have caught us, no doubt about it. He chased us through the woods and tried to murder us or kidnap us, one of the two. When my dad got the truck back, unfortunately, it was totaled in a drunk driving incident by the man that stole it. Man, that trip was a nightmare. It all started on a rainy night. My dad had wanted me to babysit my little brothers while he went to the bar to play pool and drink. I'd gotten them to settle down for the night and I decided to go order some food and chill, playing some CS while I waited. About 30 minutes had gone by and I was wondering why the hell my food was taking so long. I finally heard a knock on my door and there was a rough-looking man who said he had my food. I tipped him and he went on his way. I closed the door and walked back to my computer, completely forgetting to lock it. If one of my protective friends hadn't said something while we were gaming, things might have gone a lot worse. Them asking to make sure I locked the door was a potential life-saving question, because in fact, I had completely forgotten to lock the door. To me, it wasn't the biggest deal at the time, but I'm glad they said something, and you'll see why here in a minute. I checked on the door to make sure it was locked, and of course, it wasn't. So I locked the door real quick and went back to gaming. My computer, by the way, was in my living room, and to the right of me was my kitchen. In the kitchen, there was a giant bay window facing directly into where I was sitting and gaming. I started eating my food while gaming, and I heard my front door knob jiggle. I thought maybe I was just scared and hallucinating it since I was home alone and my brothers were asleep in bed, until my dog started barking at the front door. That was the exact moment I realized that something bad was happening. Whoever was there started banging and rattling the door handle. Freaked out, I ducked under the counter beside me, called my dad, and then called 911. While I was on the phone, my little brothers ran out of their room screaming that someone was standing outside their bedroom window, pointing towards the lock, and smiling and waving at them, trying to get them to open it for him. I completely lost it and started crying, but I had to hide my brothers in my room, in my closet, and I told them to not come out at all. I thought he was going to try the back door next, which was a glass door that he could have easily rocked back and forth to get the lock loose or even just shattered the door completely. All it would really take to break it was an object to swing at it, like a metal bat or something. So I was freaking out. I grabbed a knife and waited for my dad and the police to show up for what felt like forever. I was scared that I was going to have to defend my little brothers and myself in a life or death scenario. I was only 13 at the time, so I was really scared. The cops finally showed up, and the person had disappeared. But every night after that, I was scared he would come back and we would finally meet. I have no idea if it was someone random or the Chinese food delivery driver from earlier. I just hoped he would never come back. Luckily, he never did, but that didn't stop me from being scared shitless every night, especially when I was home alone. It's especially creepy when you think about how us kids were alone. I think he knew that and he was trying to prey on us, but luckily he gave up. Hopefully, he heard me calling the police or something, and that's why he ran. I guess we'll never really know for sure. We were hitchhiking through Europe, my then boyfriend and I, and on our way back home, a truck driver picked us up. We had had a few weird encounters on our trip before, but we had been on the road for about a month, and nothing really scary happened until we met this guy. He was a young guy, about 25, quite regular, spoke English okay, and had been away from home for a long time. I was a bit younger, with my boyfriend being around his age. My boyfriend was tired, so he took a seat on the bed in the truck and wasn't really trying to hold a conversation. During our trip, we switched turns as I usually do when I hitchhike with someone. One person talks with the driver, and the other relaxes in the back, so I was in the passenger seat. I think my boyfriend was even dozing off a little bit when the driver started complimenting me and asking about my boyfriend. It was still fine, nothing too weird, and I was just trying to talk to be good company. As we moved on, I started to feel a bit uncomfortable, but I didn't let anything on and only told my boyfriend that we should find truck drivers from our country to make the last part of our trip in one go. I translated this to English immediately because the truck driver became agitated and suspicious of what I was saying. I explained that we were really tired and our plan was to find our truck drivers before he had to take a long break so that we could continue traveling without interruption. We stopped for a short break at a gas station, and my boyfriend decided he was going to look for another truck driver in the parking lot, leaving me with this guy alone. Damn, the truck driver came on to me real hard, and I was scared shitless and didn't fight back. I could feel how aroused he was, and there was no doubt about his intentions. Luckily, my boyfriend was away for just a minute. At that moment, I realized we needed to get out of this situation fast. I didn't want to say anything to my boyfriend because I was scared of how he would react, so I decided to pretend nothing had happened. I was determined to get out at the next stop. We reached a large gas station for truck drivers only and told our driver we were going to look for other drivers heading our way. During our trip to this station, this guy got in touch with another driver, saying he could also take us, maybe one at a time. Damn, I thought, now he's planning a threesome. When I was finally alone with my boyfriend, I remained calm, hinted at what had happened, and insisted that we not stay with this driver no matter what. It took us about 5 minutes to find a group of truck drivers from our country. They were having beers and cracking jokes, and 2 of them agreed to take us. I jumped with joy. We went back to the truck to get our things. The guy had already brought his friend along and was offering my boyfriend to take a shower at the gas station, saying he would pay for him for no obvious reason. He was quite persistent, and as I very well remember, he never offered it to me. Needless to say, these 2 guys were very disappointed to see us go. I still remember how they were looking at me when I was taking our backpacks from the truck. I have never told my ex-boyfriend the details. I was just lucky that we got away from that truck driver, and I think he has never realized how bad the situation was. At that time, I was playing it cool the whole time, but inside, I was shaking. I could see how desperate that truck driver was and how much he wanted to get rid of my boyfriend. I was so angry at myself for staying with him in the truck by myself, but then all of our things were there. I was also angry for not fighting him back, but it was so sudden, and I got really scared. Well, I would never hitchhike alone. I was 18 at the time and had just started college, living out of state on my own for the first time. I had a pretty sheltered life. I am also a female, so my first semester at my out-of-state college had just ended. It was May, and I was on my way home from my brother's wedding. I'm about an hour away from my current residence, with a little over 3 hours left of my trip. Everything is going great, and I'm just cruising with the traffic. It was a notably busy day for that particular stretch of interstate, somewhere on I-40 in Tennessee. As I said, all was well until I checked my mirror. There was a truck a little farther back from the side of my car in the lane next to me. I could see his headlights in my passenger side mirror. I looked up because, even though it was the middle of the afternoon and super sunny out, this dude was flashing his lights at me. I tried to brush it off and assumed he just wanted to get into my lane, so I tried moving. He stayed behind me the whole time, not letting any other cars get between us. He kept flashing his lights at me, and I looked up at him. He waved and honked. This was a red flag, but I took it the wrong way. I thought, oh, I wonder if he's signaling me to pull over. I hope nothing is wrong with my car. The only reason I thought this was because, the week before, I had gotten a hole in my tire and had it patched. I was worried that the patch had fallen out and that my tire was going flat as I traveled. I'm freaking out about my car and plan to pull off at the next exit. Fortunately, it comes up quickly, and there is a gas station with some customers visible from the exit ramp. I head there and pull up at a gas pump. Curiously, the trucker follows me off the interstate and into the same parking lot, but he parks in a designated truck zone. I get out just before he parks and walk around my car, doing a quick inspection. I see him start to get out of his truck, and I decide to buy gas, even though I filled up before I left. As I swiped my card to pay for my gas, the truck driver had reached my car. Lucky for me, since I was already pretty freaked out by him following me off the exit, I had my phone in my hand with 911 already dialed, so I would just have to hit the call button. I left my driver door open and stayed between that and the gas hose, with him standing a few feet away from the back end of my car, the hose separating us. The first thing this guy says to me is, "Well, aren't you a pretty thing?" I'm screaming in my head now, imagining all possible scenarios for an emergency escape. He looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s and about 170 pounds. Me, I was 18, 125 pounds, without much muscle or fat anywhere on me. I wouldn't have been able to fight back much anyway. I told him thank you. He offered to buy my gas, and I declined, saying my parents gave me money. I was actually worried that he would expect something in return if I had taken his offer. He asked me questions like where I was from, where I was going, etc. Something went off in my head that just said lie, so I did. I didn't tell him what college I really went to, where I was really headed, or what I was doing. Nothing. My gas was done pumping after about a minute. With that, I told him goodbye, jumped in my car, and got out of there. I kept an eye on him as I left, making sure he didn't follow me any longer, and he didn't. I never saw him again. I don't know what he wanted with me that day, whether it was just to tell me how attractive I was or if he had something much worse planned. I really regret not reporting him to the police. Since this incident, I've always been leery of truck drivers. Back in 2013, I had just started an education, and after the first school period, I had to find an internship to progress. At the time, it proved almost impossible to get one, so while I was looking, I decided to take another job just to ensure we had food on the table. After searching for a while, I found out a friend of my fiance's family had his own handicap bus company, a kind of taxi service for wheelchair users or otherwise disabled people, and he needed someone to cover the night shift since it was a bus that had to be on call at least 22 hours a day. Seeing that I'm quite the owl, I immediately told him that I'd be happy to take the job, and after I got the needed license, I was hired. The job was pretty basic: pick up and drop them off where they needed to go, and sometimes use a machine to get wheelchairs up or down some stairs. When there were no trips, I drove to a designated area and did whatever while waiting. I quickly found a truck stop in the area where I could park and catch some Z's. There was a gas station where I could buy coffee in the early hours of the shift. On the other side of the gas station's parking lot, on the opposite side of the truck stop, there was a rundown restaurant with a motel connected to it. To avoid disturbing the sleeping truckers if I got a trip in the middle of the night, I usually parked on the restaurant side. After parking there every night for a while, I noticed one particular room had a lot of people coming and going. In the beginning, I thought nothing of it. Then, one night at the end of summer, while I was half asleep with the windows slightly open, I suddenly heard yelling coming from the motel. A dude came tumbling out of the room and started running. A few seconds later, a big guy came running after him with something in his hand that I could not make out. I thought it was none of my business and went back to my half-sleeping waiting stage. Not much time passed, and my phone went off. I had a trip an hour's drive away, so I turned on the bus and was leaving the parking lot when I saw the big guy coming around the corner. The rest of the night I had back-to-back trips, so I didn't park until I got home. The day after, I didn't get a return to home zone until 2 o'clock or 3 a.m. When I arrived at the parking lot, the area where I used to park had fist-sized rocks strewn all over the place. Not connecting the dots at the time, I just parked a few spots over and started waiting. I fell asleep pretty fast but was jerked back into reality when a car right in front of my bus honked its horn, flashed the high beams, and revved its engine. I thought it was just some idiot who noticed me sleeping and found it funny to try to scare me, so I jumped out of the bus, about to tell him to screw off. But instead of driving off or stopping, the driver made the start brake motion with the car, indicating that I was the one who should screw off. Then I connected the dots. Not wanting to seem like a pushover, I stood still and stared at the car, not that I could actually see anything with the high beams almost blinding me. After what seemed like a really long time, but must not have been more than 30 seconds, the car drove off. After that, I decided to park near the trucks from then on. A month or so passed, and nothing had happened since the car episode. I figured that nothing more would happen if I just kept parking by the trucks. Then, one night, I had a long 12-hour shift on a Sunday, and I didn't have time to eat dinner before work that day. During the first half of my shift, I had back-to-back trips with no time to eat. So when I got a return-to-home zone, I quickly parked in the far end of the almost empty truck stop and got ready to eat my now very late dinner that my fiancée packed for me. I wanted to watch some TV on my phone while eating, so I sat with my back against the driver's side door and got comfy. While turning my back to the door, I accidentally hit the door lock with my elbow, but that was my luck. As I was sitting there scrolling Netflix on my phone, I suddenly felt the bus rock and heard the clack of the door handle behind me smack back into position. I quickly turned and saw a dude with a hood over his head quickly crouching and proceeding to lay down on the ground and crawl under the bus with a big kitchen knife in his right hand. I quickly got up and made sure the other two doors were locked. Then I looked in all directions to see if I could spot him. He was still under the bus, and I was sure as hell not jumping out this time since the knife made his intentions pretty clear. I turned on the engine, turned on the spots on the back of the bus, and looked around to see if it had scared him off. Lucky for me, it did. I saw him run off into a bushy, woody area at the end of the truck stop. I never parked at that truck stop again after that night, and I made sure all doors were locked every time I was parked. I'm an only child and grew up in a small town. My parents were hardworking and often struggled to pay the bills, so they usually worked a lot of overtime or even had multiple jobs. Because of this, I was left home alone pretty frequently. I was 13 at the time, and this night both my mom and dad were working closing shifts, so I was at home by myself after school until 10 or 11. To keep myself busy, I'd usually watch TV or go for walks in the woods behind our house. After getting home from school and having a snack, I went outside and started walking along my regular path while the sun was still out. It was a 2.5 mile trail through the woods that almost never had anyone else walking on it. Strangely though, about a mile into the walk, I saw a guy on the trail up ahead. He was sitting with his back against a tree, wearing a dark blue jacket and had a red baseball cap tilted downward, covering his eyes and most of his face. From the way he was slumped over, it almost looked like he was sleeping. So I continued walking, trying to quietly pass by him. As I got just a couple of feet away, though, he lifted his head and instantly locked eyes with me. His eyes were tired and red, and he had this disturbing frown like he was upset or something. As I passed by, he started standing up, and getting a strange feeling about him, I began walking faster, basically jogging the rest of the trail and back home. I didn't see him follow me, but I locked all the doors just in case. Again, I was only 13, and even though I was used to being home alone, I still got scared pretty easily. I stayed inside and checked the windows one last time before trying to distract myself by watching TV. Only a few minutes after turning it on, though, I heard a voice at the back door. I paused the TV and listened, hearing a man call out multiple times, repeating the word, "Hello." I stood up and looked down the main hallway. That same guy with the red cap and blue jacket was standing at the back door, almost pressing his face into it as he tried to look inside. I quickly went back around the corner, but he must have seen me because he immediately stopped calling out and instead started trying to force the door open. I just froze up in the middle of the living room, listening to the door jolt back and forth against the lock. After several attempts, though, he left. I called my parents, and they called the police, but he was never found. Having been followed home and them trying to break in, though, I can only imagine what they were trying to do to me. This happened when my now husband and I were moving from the east to the west coast of the US. This had been our second time making this trip, and this one was just to pick up a few last things and grab our 2 dogs. At this point, we were just trying to make good time since we were tired of being on the road and would only stop for food and restroom breaks. So we weren't strangers to rest stops at odd hours of the day. I can't remember what state this happened in because we do a lot of traveling, and rest stops have all blurred together over the years. Anyways, my husband had been driving for a while, and it was time to switch off, walk the dogs, and stretch our legs. So we pulled into a rest stop around 3 o'clock or 4 a.m. There was only one other vehicle in the lot, most likely with someone sleeping inside of it, and not that many truckers in the truck area, so the rest area was fairly empty. I jumped out of the car and let my husband know I was going to run into the restroom before I let the dogs out. While I ran in, he was going to hang out by the car to have a smoke and keep an eye on our dogs. However, we parked our car by the dog area, and to get to the restrooms, you had to walk over this hill. You couldn't see the restrooms from our car. Being late at night, my husband decided to walk most of the way with me to make sure I got there okay. I wasn't worried but didn't mind the extra comfort of having him there. I finished up in the restroom and came out to walk the dogs and let my husband take his restroom break. Even though it was late and I felt a bit cut off from the lighted area of the rest stop, I wasn't worried. I'm small and don't weigh much, but my dogs are German Shepherd mixes and very protective of me. Plus, I was taught self-defense at a young age and feel capable of defending myself if the time came. So I'm walking my dogs and letting them do their business when I noticed that one of the semi-trucks, which had been sitting on the far side of the stop, starts up and slowly drives in my direction. This didn't seem worrisome to me because they were on the trucker's side, and I assumed they were heading to the exit to get back onto the highway. I grabbed 2 doggy bags to clean up after my dogs and started heading to the trash can. As I'm walking, I'm suddenly blinded by bright headlights. I looked in the direction of the lights and saw that the semi, which I thought was leaving, had pulled up as close to the truck lot and car lot divide as possible and now had its brights aimed directly at me. Pissed off that someone was blinding me with their brights, I quickly tossed the poop bags away and started walking back to my car. As I'm walking away, the dude starts flashing his lights over and over again. I'm almost to my car, wondering if I'm missing something and becoming more and more irritated. He starts creeping his truck in my direction again while flashing his lights. My dogs sensed my irritation and immediately went on alert, staring in the trucker's direction. I finally made my way to my car, and the guy is still flashing his lights while stopping his truck in my direction again. I don't scare easily, so I decided to stand there and glare in his direction. Then he finally stopped flashing his lights. Good, I assumed he was done and started getting my keys out to unlock the car. Suddenly, my dogs stiffened beside me, their hackles raised, and they began to growl. I heard the sound of a door opening and turned back in the trucker's direction. I saw his door was now opened, and I saw a foot starting to exit the truck. I'm sitting there thinking this guy is a complete idiot when, at this point, my husband shows up and wraps his arm around me while flipping the trucker off. The trucker's foot disappears back into his truck. He shuts his door and leaves the rest stop pretty fast. I told my husband about him flashing his lights, and he explained that truckers use this method to flag women down at rest stops for sex. I was grossed out. I'm guessing he thought I was alone because of how the rest stop was set up. However, I was in no way dressed like someone interested in random sex at a rest stop. I was wearing layers because it was cold and driving a newer car. Plus, what idiot thinks it's a good idea to try to approach someone with two huge dogs? Although I was never scared during the whole thing, I do think the situation was creepy because the guy was obviously not quite there and was acting pretty abrasive. A few months ago, I was driving back to school from visiting my parents. It's about a 2-hour drive, so I usually keep myself entertained with music. I'm a 5 feet 3 inches, 21-year-old female driving my dad's little old pickup truck alone in the leftmost lane of a 3-lane highway, dorking around to the music on the radio. Suddenly, I noticed a semi-truck going the exact same speed as me in the rightmost lane. Embarrassed for getting caught in dork mode, I stopped singing and tried to speed up so he couldn't see me anymore. He matched my speed, which ticked me off a little bit, so I looked at the driver, expecting to see some angry jerk. To my surprise, he was smiling and waving. Thrown off, I kind of chuckled and waved back. Big mistake. He moved over to the middle lane to be closer to me and now wouldn't stop smiling and waving. At first, I played nice, waving back a little because a semi-truck beats a tiny pickup truck any day. But I was mostly focusing on getting out of this guy's field of vision safely. I tried speeding up as fast as my truck would allow and slowing down as suddenly as I could without endangering anyone behind me, but he would just match my speed. If there was someone coming up in his lane, he'd move to the right at the last possible second and pass them before I could slow down and get behind them. He has a lot more practice with reckless maneuvering than I do, so he has me trapped and is using other cars to help him. The whole time, he's smiling, waving, and holding up the number 1 sign for some reason I still don't know. His charm is rapidly fading as this continues for about 5 miles. I got worried and called 911. I gave them a description of the truck: white cargo truck, black cab with some Pennsylvania company logo on it, and the driver was a balding, middle-aged tan guy with a dirty blue t-shirt. They advised me to pull off to the emergency shoulder on the left, but I had never done that and it looked too narrow, so I didn't feel comfortable doing that. At this point, he was passing someone else in the middle lane, and I finally had a chance to slow down and merge 2 lanes over to the rightmost lane. I started speeding past him so he couldn't trap me again. The operator told me to take the closest service plaza about 5 miles away. She said he probably wouldn't follow me, so I could stop there for a few minutes before getting back on the highway. She told me to call if he did follow me, but she was confident he probably wouldn't, so she hung up. Now he's still holding up the sign and smiling this creepy, increasingly perverted grin at me while I avoid eye contact. The service plaza is in a quarter mile, and I'm not using any turn signals, but I guess he knew what I was doing because he braked hard and merged behind me right at the last second to join me in exiting to the service plaza. After I got my heart to start back up from the coronary area just experienced, I called 911 again. The way this service plaza was set up was that semi-trucks had to use a separate lane winding to the right of the plaza that led to a parking lot behind the plaza just for big trucks. The rest of us used a smaller lane to park immediately in front of the plaza. I parked, and as I'm explaining to the new operator what's going on, I watched the semi creep around its path while the driver stared me down, smiling. I freaked out. He knew where I had parked, he knew where to find me. If I just stayed there, I thought maybe I could have floored it to get back on the highway, but I was afraid he would see me and follow me again. So, I drove to a gas station to the left of the plaza, which had a view of the semi-truck parking lot, hoping he wouldn't find me until the police came. The operator transferred me to the woman who was helping me before. She informed me that they had dispatched a couple of police cars but couldn't tell me how long they would be. I saw the trucker had gotten out of his truck and was heading towards me. Even though my windows were closed and my doors were locked, I was panicking on the phone with the operator. She told me the police should be there soon and that I should be safe there, so I should sit tight while I kept her updated. I wanted to at least drive back to the parking lot I was in before, but it was a one-way entrance to the gas station, so I couldn't. I glared at the trucker and showed him my phone when he came close. He finally stopped smiling and made it look like he was going into the service plaza. I looked in my right side view mirror and found him hiding behind a big white pillar in front of the plaza, staring at me again. I freaked out and asked the operator where the cops were and if I could leave because he was being ultra creepy. She told me to sit tight again because they should be there any minute, so I did. Then he came out of hiding and started walking towards my truck. I put it in drive just in case and told the operator what he was doing. I refused to make eye contact with him but kept watching my mirrors to make sure I knew where he was. The smile was back, and he started walking in circles around my truck, looking at it as if looking for a way to get in. I couldn't take it anymore. I waited until he circled back behind me, floored it, and told the operator I wasn't waiting one more second for the police. She apologized and told me the police would look for the man and talk to him if they found him, and that I should focus on getting home safely while keeping an eye out for him. I don't know if they did that or not, but I know none of that would have happened if I had my boyfriend with me. So not only can't I walk alone, but I also can't drive alone as a female. Nice to know. It was the middle of the summer. I was 11 years old and my younger brother was 8. We were outside playing various games with other kids in our neighborhood, but we finally headed home as the sun went down. Maybe once a week, our parents would go to a different restaurant around town, leaving my younger brother and me home alone. Most of the time, they'd tell us before they went out, but if we were outside playing, sometimes they'd just leave us to our game. When we got back home and no one was there, we assumed this was the case. Confirming this was a note left on the kitchen counter. My younger brother and I both went to the living room to watch TV, something we usually did before bed. After half an hour, it had gotten completely dark outside. Just then, I heard the doorbell ring, followed by knocking. At first, I thought it was our parents getting back, but it definitely wasn't normal for them to use the front door, much less not have a key for it. The chances of the garage door opener they had not working them for getting a key were extremely low. Although I realized it was still possible, I left the living room and went up to the front door to see who it was. As I approached the door, I heard a man's voice yell that he was selling Girl Scout cookies. I was extremely confused considering the time of day. I looked through the peephole and saw a grown man, completely alone, with no cookies in hand and not with his daughter as I was expecting. The man yelled out once more before moving his hand to the door handle. My heart dropped, realizing that we had forgotten to lock the door when coming in for the night. The door handle slowly started turning, and I quickly engaged the deadlock. A clicking sound echoed out. It was too loud. Clearly, the man had heard it and now knew someone was inside. I waited a minute before once again looking through the peephole. The man was now looking through our living room window directly at my younger brother, who was completely unaware of what was going on. From where he now stood, I could make out a gun holstered on the left side of his waist. I ran back to the living room and closed the blinds. I told my brother we should get some ice cream downstairs in the basement. I needed to get him away from any windows, but I knew that if he knew what was going on, he would freak out. He agreed, and we went downstairs. I silently locked the basement door behind us. We ate our ice cream, and eventually, I could hear the hum of the garage door opening from upstairs, signifying that my parents were back home. Later, when my brother wasn't around, I told them what had happened. They were horrified and understandably called the police. The police inspected the place, and one of the first things they noticed was how the front door's lock had clearly been tampered with, basically confirming the man had ill intent and was trying to break in. What he planned to do when he got inside, though, I can't say for sure, and neither can the police. The man was never identified. To this day, my younger brother doesn't even know this whole event took place. I've worked in manual labor my entire life, but I took a gig hauling trucks for a few years in the early 2000s. I got an offer for a package that I couldn't refuse in the way of full-time pay with part-time hours if I could meet the arrival times. I got insurance benefits, everything an employee dreams about. I got my commercial driver's license as well as a few other certifications, and found myself on the road just a month or so later. I had a lot of jobs where things got weird or just crazy, but one particular evening makes the others pale in comparison. I don't like stories with a lot of fluff, so I'm just going to jump right into it. I was on a return trip from Oregon to Minnesota. I had already made one delivery, hooked up a second, and was now technically on my way home. This was about the halfway point. Weather was great, I was feeling good and motivated. My time on that trip was well ahead of schedule, so I made sure not to push it or burn myself out. I found it super defeating to get home from a long haul and be too exhausted to enjoy it. It's always better to take a little time and stay level. I also have a bit of a heart condition, so heavy caffeine intake isn't an option for me. Most of my life has been all natural, using whatever remedy I could come up with to keep my energy up. The biggest influence was just a good diet, exercise, and a consistent sleep schedule. That means I stopped every night generally at the same time, got a good amount of rest, and that's it. Many of my trips were clocked to the very last second, but I managed to always arrive on time. I passed over the Idaho border and started gunning through Montana. Lots of beauty, but ultimately not much in the way of civilization out there. The route took me through Missoula and some more established townships. Between them, though, you'd be lucky to find a service station of any kind. Rural stretches like this always kept me on my toes, as I'd heard horror stories about guys running out of gas, blowing tires, or encountering engine trouble. There isn't help for 75 miles in each direction. On top of that, some of these rural stretches don't see a lot of traffic. Some early mornings, I wouldn't see another car on the road for an hour at a time. I had my eyes set on a trucking station out in the middle of nowhere between Bozeman and Livingston. I'd roll through Bozeman around dinner time, grab a quick bite to eat, then push on towards the station. I'd let my food settle and digest a bit. After an hour of driving, I'd hit my target, pull over, and be totally ready for bed. I liked routine, structure, and having a plan. That night, everything was supposed to be simple. At first, it was. My plan was going smoothly. I got dinner, gassed up, experienced little to no traffic, and was back on the road in no time. Soon, I found my head swimming from the digestion and long day of driving. But there it was, some lights out there alongside the highway. You know exactly what I'm talking about, those big concrete pullouts on the side of interstates every 100 miles or so. They usually have a bathroom, vending machine, trash cans, everything people living on the road might need. I pulled in and found a rare sight, not a single vehicle anywhere. No one was using this rest station, and I liked that. There's a kind of security in being solo, if that makes sense. I let the truck cool down, locked everything up, then crawled into the living space in the back. My area was very simple, a bed, small table attached to the wall, and an overhead shelf to store most of my belongings. I also had a little makeshift power cell which I used to charge a portable flip DVD player that had both the player and the screen. It was one of those inventions of the 2000s that could have only been popular then. I settled in with my big blankets and pillows and watched one of my favorites, Resident Evil or Reign of Fire, an action thriller of some kind. Despite the shooting and explosions, I fell asleep just after 30 minutes. I closed the DVD player and surrendered to the darkness inside my cab. It must have only been a couple hours later when something woke me up. I couldn't place it, but I knew something jarred me. I have a habit of snoring occasionally, and when I do, I sometimes wake myself up with one of those louder rips. I thought maybe that's what happened, so I snuggled in for a few more hours of sleep. I like to hit the road before sunrise and get those extra miles in before the rest of the world wakes up. Just as I closed my eyes though, I heard it, the sound that woke me up. It wasn't a snore like I thought, but the abruptness of a cough. It came from somewhere beyond the cab, outside in the parking lot. It sounded partially muffled, maybe another trucker had pulled in and I just simply hadn't heard the rumble. Really didn't seem that likely, but I guess anything is possible, right? I wanted to be sure of what I heard, so I turned on the small overhead light. The second that flicked on, I could hear shoes slapping the asphalt and the sound of someone running away. As I listened, the footsteps faded a bit. The person was running away from my truck. They must have seen the light come on and reacted to that. But at this point, I'm now on high alert. I turned the light off so as not to give away my position within the truck. As long as it's dark, it's almost impossible to see in the depth of the sleeping cab, so I used that to my advantage. Looking out, I surveyed the parking lot and found something unusual, an older van parked across the lot, sitting angled so the broadside faced my windshield. Definitely weird, as I was 100% alone when I pulled in originally. That parking lot was empty. I tried to be reasonable though. Maybe he was walking his dog, having a smoke. Whatever the case, the person was likely a long-haul traveler just like myself. The guy was probably stretching his legs, doing a few laps of the parking lot when he accidentally woke me up. Once he saw the light, he realized that he made a mistake, then hightailed it back to his van. It really wasn't the most out-of-the-ordinary thing to happen at a truck stop. With a little apprehension, I let everything go and didn't investigate it any further. Despite my best efforts, I couldn't fall back asleep. Just as I started to drift off, I heard those footsteps again, and then what I thought sounded like someone tugging on the passenger side door handle. There was an unmistakable click, then the sway of someone stepping off the sidebar. Whoever I'd heard coughing was just trying to get inside my truck. At this point, All my alarms are going off in my head, and that structured, well-planned part of my brain is now scrambling. For whatever reason, and a lot of my friends have given me flack for it over the years, I didn't carry a gun on these truck hauls. I did have a short club that I used to check my tire pressure, and that was a great second option. At this point, I believed my best choice was to nut up and confront whoever was milling around the parking lot, let them know that my truck wasn't public property. All at once, I threw the passenger door open and clicked my flashlight on. I had a small, steady streamlight that could reach something like 30 yards, not with the puffy yellow flare of a cheap flashlight, but with a white, concentrated light. I swept it back and forth, saw nothing, so I started inspecting the truck and the trailer. I saw nothing at first glance, so I hopped down and did a full lap of the rig. Still nothing, not even underneath it. Only one option left now, time to go look at that van. I swept the flashlight around and started marching up to the rear. I wanted to see the license plate before I checked it out any further. As I went to eye the back of the bumper, I brought my light up so I could see. My eyes naturally went to the license plate, which was from South Dakota, but something else caught my attention. I couldn't place it at first, but as I kept looking, it all came into focus. Below the back of the van, near the far back tire, there was a pair of boots. Someone was crouched and hiding on the other side of it. Only the toe tips poked out, but it was enough for me to see what was going on. I left the light on the boots for 10 to 20 seconds, long enough for them to realize that they were exposed. I watched in disbelief as the boots slowly shuffled backward until they were completely hidden behind the tire. My stomach soured at the whole thing. This person clearly had ill intentions, and I wanted nothing to do with them. I wanted to say something, but I found myself completely speechless. I'm not confrontational. You may have gleaned that from my lack of a firearm. I didn't want to issue a threat to someone who might have the upper hand. I just backed up until I reached my truck, hopped in, and locked the door. I figured that encounter was enough. I got out and found them, who would come up and keep messing with me. We both knew what was going on at this point, so the mystery was completely over. Just some vagrant weirdo looking to make a score. Now that he knew the truck wasn't abandoned, I hoped that he would just move on. I sat for 45 minutes, and that van never moved. I didn't see anything move, no person, no door opening or closing. It's like they were still hiding behind that rear passenger tire. As the morning went on, though, sleep came and kissed me, and I knew I needed to get at least a couple more hours of rest if I wanted to have a successful day. My eyes started to droop, and soon I was snoozing. The sound that woke me this time was clear, loud, and right outside the door. It was the sound of a man clearing his throat, the sound someone makes when they want your attention. My eyes shot up, and I moved to the glass, and there, just peeking over the lip of the door, I can see someone looking into my cab. I freeze, hoping they can't see me, but it doesn't matter. This guy's eyes are rolling back and forth, taking it all in, looking for whoever is inside. He looks crazy, like he'd given himself a haircut with a butter knife. Some of it was shaved, some of it was long, and I could see nicks along his scalp. I think his eyebrows were shaved off too, but it was hard to tell in the moonlight. I could literally feel this guy pulling on the door handle, making the entire truck move. I did the only thing that I could think of, shout as loud as I could. "What do you want?" I hollered at the glass, still motionless in the back of the cab. This is also a censored conversation, as I remember swearing in literally every sentence that I spoke to this guy. He said, "It's me." "Who?" I asked. Okay, maybe this was a case of a mix-up. I sat up and reached for the club on the floor. It's Henry, come on, he pleaded. I don't know you. I'm not from here. Now please just get away from my truck, I explained to him. The conversation devolved from that point forward. Playing hard to get. I like it. Let's do something different, he said. This guy went on at length about what he wanted to do to me. None of it involved violence at all. Everything this guy said was sexual from start to finish. I'm watching this guy lick the window of my semi as he tells me he wants to kiss my feet, worship me, pleasure every part of me. I'm not homophobic, but the whole thing was nauseating. As he's going on and on and on about his sexual fantasies, transitioning into what he wants me to do to him, I'm yelling for him to just please go away. Throughout the entire thing, his tone changes. He starts talking about his desires, which were much more violent. This guy wanted someone to hurt him during their sexual escapades, punched, choked, tied up, and abused, the whole shebang. I couldn't really believe what I was hearing. He switched from licking the window to tapping on it before finally smashing his fist into the glass. I had to do something. I remembered my portable DVD player and, for whatever reason, came up with this weird little plan. I opened it up and faced it away from the front of the cab so the light would illuminate my face, but he wouldn't be able to see what the light was coming from. I'm calling the police, I said, hoping the light source would look like a car phone or a radio. I've got your South Dakota plates too. Nathan, he asked. I'm not who you're looking for. Now get the hell out of here, man, was the last thing that I ever said to this person. I watched him leap down and start running all in one swift motion. The van fired up and, without even turning its headlights on, fled from the parking lot like a bat out of hell. Honestly, I ended up doing the same. After another inspection of the trailer and tires to make sure everything was secure, I rolled out and made for Livingston. That morning, I really played with the idea of calling the police and making some kind of report, but thought it would be more trouble than it was actually worth. I didn't have the actual plate number, just that it was a Dakota van, so I figured my report would go absolutely nowhere. It wasn't until I got out of trucking that I realized how common this type of encounter was, especially after the invention of Craigslist. Truck stops have always been known for midnight rendezvous, but became explicit for random hookups all over the country, particularly for traveling men who wanted to experiment. Whoever that Henry guy was, he thought I was Richard, who was probably another trucker rolling through Montana that night. Henry must have gotten the truck station mixed up, or Richard was late to the arrival, so he got us confused. Regardless and whatever the case, I'm very glad that I had my doors locked that night, as I could be telling a very different story right now. Have a plan when you hit the road and always stick to that plan. This happened when I was like 16 and in my heavy gaming phase, still living with my parents. I played a lot of League of Legends in my room on my computer in those days, especially in the summertime when it's so unbearably hot outside and I preferred to stay inside in the air conditioning. Anyway, way back when I lived at home, I'd have the place to myself a lot because my parents traveled a lot and I was the last one to move out. If I recall correctly, this was on a Friday night or a night that school was out the next day because I was staying up late. After I got home from school, I submitted a paper that was due that night to get it over with. Then, I had to do some shopping afterward on my mom's orders since they'd be gone for a while. It was how I earned my keep in the house, according to my dad. They left cash for me to use. I always had to show them the receipt though so that I wouldn't just pocket any of the money. My mom gave me a shopping list, so I went to Whole Foods in my old Camry, my first car. Shopping took about an hour. While in the grocery store, this guy in line behind me started talking to me, and I don't know why. He made a comment about one of the things I was buying and just wouldn't stop, even as I was bagging my groceries. He kept talking to me, which I found weird. He wasn't paying attention to anyone else. I was still nice though. When it was time to leave, I said, "Have a good one," and left. I went out to my car in the parking lot, packed the trunk, then headed home. It was a scorching hot day as we were in early June. I wasn't looking to go out and do anything outside. Once I was done with everything I needed to do, it was dark out by now, so I got right on League of Legends on my computer and texted my friend David to get on as well. He joined my party, and we played some dual rank as we always did. I was using my noise-canceling headset. We were committed already to playing League of Legends all night and ranking up, so of course, I needed to take a break to make dinner at some point. Probably 2 hours into playing, I told David I was going to eat dinner and I'd probably be back on in an hour. He said he'd be back on later too. So with that, I took a break and made some pasta for dinner. The kitchen is downstairs, and my room is upstairs. While I was sitting in the kitchen eating, I knew for sure I heard a thump from upstairs. Did it sound like a footstep? I wasn't sure. It could have been any number of things, but the last thing I'd imagine it would be was a footstep. I did, however, go and lock the front door. Now, oftentimes for a while, I would leave the door unlocked just because my parents' house is in a good side of town, and I just never took the idea of a break-in seriously. It's something you hear about on the news but don't think it'll ever happen to you. I went upstairs, and I don't know what I was expecting, but I said my brother Tristan's name into the hallway. I knew he wasn't supposed to be here, but I don't know, I heard a sound and I felt the urge to see if anyone was here. When no one answered back, I went back to my room and got back on League of Legends. I put my headset back on and texted David that I'm going back on. Shortly after, he came back on. We started playing again. A couple of games in, I looked to my left at the doorway of my room into the hallway. I don't know if something in my peripheral vision or some other sense felt something there, but I would leave the door open when I was home alone as my mom would tell me to. The hallway was dark except for the one little nightlight plugged into an outlet. My room shone blue from my wall lights. Some of the blue poured into the part of the hallway closest to my room. In between the crack of the door was total blackness. I couldn't see through it. I didn't think anything of it. After our next game, David said he was taking a leak and walked away. While we were in the lobby, I looked at my phone, then looked back out to the hallway, and I noticed something was different. Now I could see through the crack of the door into the hallway. My first thought was someone blocking it just minutes ago? By instinct, I spun my chair around to face the bed behind me, and there was a man sitting on my bed with his freakishly upright posture and his hands resting on his thighs. He almost looked to be smiling. I was so alarmed I jumped out of my seat onto the desk and crawled onto the desk, causing my monitor and basically everything else to fall off of it. I screamed, "What do you want?" and he started to actually smile now, showing his teeth like he was laughing. I ran out of the room into the hallway. I stopped halfway down the hallway and looked back at my bedroom door. I heard the springs of my bed lifting, and then the guy slowly walked into the doorway and stopped. He stood there. I once again yelled, "What do you want?" He then spoke in a stuttered, slow voice, asking if he could play too. I asked, "How did you get in here?" He stepped a few steps forward and pointed down the stairs. I assumed he was implying he entered through the front door. I was at a loss for what to do, so I ran down the stairs to the landline phone, as my cell phone was still in my room. I grabbed the phone and a kitchen knife and screamed, "You need to leave. I'm calling 911. I heard footsteps walking down the steps, and the last time I saw the guy was when he walked past the kitchen, looked at me, and then I heard him walking out the front door. I ran to slam it shut and lock it. For the first time ever, I was ashamed of myself for leaving the door completely unlocked. I held the phone for a few minutes, deciding whether to tell my parents. Ultimately, I did. My mom was concerned at first, then grew livid, so much so to the point that she put my dad on the phone. He told me to go through the house and make sure nothing was taken. I went through every room, and honestly, everything seemed in place. I said the man seemed like something was off about him. The man didn't seem overtly hostile, but something was wrong with him, and I don't know what his intention was. The image of him sitting on my bed and the realization that he was watching me through the crack in the door was haunting enough. This is a story I'm not proud of, mostly for my naivety. When I was in middle school and early high school, I didn't know how to talk to girls at all at school, but that's a lot of boys in middle school. I wasn't shy in general. I had friends and did normal things an 8th grader would do. I just had never kissed a girl or anything. Some of my friends at the time claimed they had already gone further than that with girls, and I was starting to feel pressure. But I was still having trouble approaching girls in that way. The mentality went from boys making fun of girls to suddenly liking them in a matter of like a year. I was a pretty big gamer in middle school and early high school. This was when I was in 8th grade. I was like 13. My voice was still probably a bit prepubescent sounding. It was 2009. I played a lot of console games and computer MMORPG games. My favorite console games at the time were GTA 4 and Call of Duty, and my favorite computer game was this MMORPG called Ganu. It was this online game where you would level up by killing monsters, and the more you leveled up, the higher level monsters and hunting grounds you'd be able to tackle. The online community in this game was very active, and there were tons of players. My older brother used to play it a little bit too. I played it more for sure though. I was in a guild and town and everything. I don't remember how it happened, but I befriended this female player who was a higher level than me. Her username was Pokimane. Anytime I'd sign in and she was on, she'd message me and vice versa. We would join parties together, which meant we'd share EXP on whatever monsters we killed, and we just chatted for hours. She knew a lot about me, including my age and my town, and some personal family details she would open up to me too. Eventually, she told me her name was Karina. It was weird feeling such a connection with a girl when really, I knew nothing about her appearance or her voice. It truly was like having a pen pal, but better. It was interesting enough that we both lived in Texas state. She lived about an hour from me. After a few weeks, or maybe even a month, we started talking about maybe meeting one day. To do this, though, we'd have to exchange numbers. At the time, I didn't actually have a cell phone yet. I only had an iPod Touch. However, I was able to download a texting app that allowed me to send messages to people with cell phones. Through this app, I was able to send her a picture of myself. It was definitely this cringy 8th grade boy selfie of me trying to look good looking. She called me cute, and then she sent back a picture of herself. She looked a couple of years older than me, like 15, which was the age she told me she was. Based on the picture, I found her very attractive. This was around the time our messages became more flirtatious and romantic. But we were both minors, so neither of us could just drive an hour away. However, she apparently had a solution for this. She told me her sister had friends that lived around me, and she could probably get a ride to me. This was exciting news for my little 13-year-old self. I wanted to wait for a day and night when my parents wouldn't be home, so I'd have the house to myself. This was about a week later, I believe. My parents were going to the Hamptons for the whole weekend, so it would just be my brother and me home. My brother was 18, so I asked him to please just go out for the night with friends so that I could be alone with Karina. I gave Karina my address and told her to come that Saturday whenever she wanted. She said she'd be coming a little later, like at night. She didn't give me an exact time. At that point, we still had never spoken on the phone. I still hadn't heard her voice. I was so nervous all day that I couldn't even play video games. I was busy cleaning my room, making things look cool, fixing my appearance, and even rehearsing things to say in the initial moments of meeting. Then I got a message from Karina saying she's here. I sprang up and ran to the front door. I looked through the peephole and didn't see anyone. She then said, "You can come out to the front door." I opened the door and stepped onto the front porch. I looked around, and the street was dark and quiet, no cars, no people. I went back inside and shut the door. I messaged her back saying, "I don't see you." She replied, "Oh, I must have the wrong house. Give me a minute." That was a bit weird. I locked the door and sat on the living room couch, nervously waiting and playing games on my iPod. I got a message from her again. She said she's here and to come outside. I replied, "Ring the bell so I know you're at the right house." Then the doorbell rang. My nerves really set in. I walked to the door, looked through the peephole, and didn't see anyone. I said, "Karina." Through the peephole, I saw a hand reach towards the door and knock. I said, "Karina," again as I kept looking through the peephole. Everything felt like it instantly crumbled on top of me as this bald, creepy-looking short guy stepped in front of the peephole and then said through the door, "Hey, it's Pokemon. I want to talk." I ran away from the door with my hands over my mouth, truly speechless. The person I'd been talking to all this time was a creepy grown man. I was disgusted and scared. I went to call my brother's cell phone. He didn't pick up. The doorbell kept ringing. I went to my bedroom and locked myself in. I held the house phone in my grasp, considering calling my parents but too embarrassed to do so. My room was the only other room in the house with the lights on. I have a big window in my room that overlooks the whole side yard of our corner house. I turned off my lamp and slightly kinked the blind just a crack, and I saw that guy on the other side trying to look in. He started to knock on the window and said through the closed window how much of a connection we clearly have and that we could at least be friends. I responded with nothing. I called my brother again, and he picked up this time. I said, "Please come home right now." The Karina person was a grown man the entire time, and he's at my window right now. My brother's always been pretty big, even as a teenager. I'd feel safer with him being here. He said he was coming home with his friends right now. We stayed on the phone so I could tell him if anything happened. I ran to my parents' bedroom upstairs and hid there. The man was blowing up my message app, saying he would like to talk and that there was a reason he had to lie about who he was. When my brother got home, he told me he saw the guy outside. My brother and his 3 friends confronted the creepy short man outside. I went outside then to watch the 4 of them intimidate the man, calling him a sicko. The man's defense was that he was concerned for my well-being, inviting strangers from online over, and that this was supposed to be a learning lesson. I refuted this claim by asking him why he would say that we could be good friends at my window when my brother and his friends started pushing the man. He started quickly walking to his car. My brother kicked the guy's tail light while one of his friends threw a rock at his window. He sped off down the road, never to be seen again. This was humiliating and disturbing, but at the same time, I was really grateful for my brother and his friends coming to my aid. They potentially saved me from a seriously sick creep breaking into the house. It's still painful and uncomfortable realizing all that time I spent opening up to who I thought was a girl my own age on a game was some creepy grown man with a different agenda. Our first story begins on a Friday night, the air thick with anticipation. A young man named Jack, an avid gamer, scoured online marketplaces for a deal on a used console, eager to dive into the latest releases. He stumbled upon an offer that seemed too good to be true, a current-gen console, practically brand new, being sold at a fraction of the retail price. The seller, only identified as KL, was vague in his responses, claiming he simply needed to get rid of it. Despite a prickle of unease, Jack dismissed his better judgment and arranged to meet KL at a dimly lit gas station later that evening. The seller, a gaunt man with nervous eyes, arrived in a beat-up car, the console hastily wrapped in a garbage bag. He practically shoved it into Jack's hands, eager to be rid of the device. Jack, his excitement overriding his apprehension, paid the man and hurried home, eager to boot up his new purchase. As he connected the console to his TV, he noticed an unsettling detail he had overlooked in his haste, a single deep scratch etched across the top of the console, almost resembling a cryptic symbol. Brushing it off as nothing more than cosmetic damage, Jack grabbed his controller and prepared to enter a world of digital entertainment. From the moment he pressed the power button, things felt off. The console whirred to life with an unnatural hum, the fan noise louder and more erratic than it should have been. The screen flickered, displaying distorted images and garbled text before snapping into focus, revealing the console's home screen. But something was different. The usual cheerful background was replaced with a static image of a dark, desolate forest, the trees twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Jack chalked it up to a corrupted hard drive, a minor inconvenience he could easily fix with a factory reset. As he navigated the console's menu, he noticed strange glitches, the cursor moving on its own, selecting options he hadn't chosen. The console seemed to have a mind of its own, its actions becoming increasingly erratic and unsettling. Unease curdled in his stomach, but Jack, determined to make his new purchase work, continued to tinker with the settings, attempting to restore the console to its factory settings. His efforts were met with resistance, the console seemingly fighting back, the screen flashing with disturbing imagery, grotesque figures with hollow eyes and gaping maws flickering in and out of existence. Cold dread washed over Jack as he realized that this was no ordinary glitch. Our next tale takes us back to the neon-lit golden age of arcades, a time when joystick warriors battled it out for high scores and bragging rights. In the bustling heart of the city, nestled between a dingy pizzeria and a flickering neon sign promising adult entertainment, stood the Pixel Palace, a haven for gamers seeking an escape from reality. Among the flashing lights and the cacophony of blips and bleeps stood a machine unlike any other, its faded paint and flickering screen whispering tales of a bygone era. This was Dark Carnival, a game shrouded in mystery and whispered rumors, said to be haunted by the spirit of a former player. The legend went that a young man named Ben, a regular at the Pixel Palace, had become obsessed with Dark Carnival, spending every waking moment at the arcade, his fingers flying across the joystick, his eyes glued to the screen. He poured his allowance into the machine, determined to conquer its fiendishly difficult levels. After weeks of relentless gameplay, Ben finally achieved his goal, his initials flashing proudly at the top of the high-score screen. But his triumph was short-lived. As he celebrated his victory, a surge of electricity of freak accident seared through the machine, striking Ben down where he stood. Some say Ben's spirit, unable to leave the game he loved, became trapped within the machine, his digital ghost forever bound to the arcade cabinet. And so the legend of Dark Carnival grew, whispered among the regulars, a chilling tale of obsession and the insatiable hunger for the high score. Most dismissed it as an urban legend, a spooky story meant to deter players from hogging the machine for too long. But there were those who claimed to have witnessed strange occurrences firsthand, the screen flickering erratically, the game playing on its own, the faint sound of laughter echoing from the speakers, a chilling melody that sent shivers down their spines. One evening, a group of friends, their laughter echoing through the arcade, gathered around the Dark Carnival machine, their competitive spirits ignited. Among them was Tony, a skeptic by nature who scoffed at the stories surrounding the game. "It's just an old machine," he declared, "nothing more than wires and circuits." His friends, a mix of believers and those who enjoyed a good scare, exchanged nervous glances as Tony deposited a coin into the machine, the screen bursting to life with a burst of static. As Tony navigated the game's opening levels with ease, his skepticism began to waver. The game seemed to anticipate his every move, the enemies reacting with an almost unnatural precision, as if controlled by a sentient force. One of my favorite hobbies has always been playing video games. When I was younger, I used to do a lot of console gaming, but in recent years, I've done most of my gaming on the PC. So, I have a setup in my bedroom in the apartment that I currently live in. It's in one corner of the room opposite my bed. Several weeks ago, I was having a gaming night with a friend. We both logged on at probably a little after 8 p.m. I was at my apartment, and he was at his apartment, so we were just gaming online. We were going to go until we got tired. I live alone in my small one-bedroom apartment, which is kind of old and on the first floor of the building. After playing online for several hours, neither of us were tired yet. At this point, I'm guessing it was around 11 p.m. That's when I thought I heard a knocking at my window behind me. I had my headset on, which is mostly noise canceling, so I couldn't hear that well, but I looked back to the window. It's probably like 15 feet from my desk and the chair I was sitting in. When I looked, I thought I saw what appeared to be a man moving away from the window. The window looks out to a small grassy area behind the apartments. Then there's a fence between the next property and a little woods before another apartment complex. In all my time living here, I had never really seen anybody out walking back there or anything, so this was kind of strange and also suspicious. The total time that I saw the guy was less than a second, though he was already moving away when I turned around and looked. I told my friend I would be back in a minute, and then I got up. I then walked over to the window and looked out of it. It was pretty dark in the little space back there, but I could see a little bit. However, I did not notice anyone there. I then left my bedroom and walked out to the kitchen, which also had a window looking out to that same general area. This had a broader view, but I still didn't see anyone. I figured that the guy was gone. This situation was kind of weird, especially with it being late at night. My only good explanation that I could think of was that possibly the man accidentally went to the wrong apartment window. He could have been trying to get somebody else's attention who he knew. I then went back to my gaming chair and sat down. I told my friend about what had happened. We chatted about it for a while and decided that it probably wasn't a big deal. However, probably 30 minutes after this or so, I remember looking back to the window. My headset was still on, so I don't remember if I heard anything or if I was just randomly turning around. When I did, though, I saw a man standing at the window. He was looking in. Because of it being dark outside, I did not really see any details of the man's face or what he looked like. Instinctively, I quickly got up from my chair. When I did, the man moved out of sight from the window. I then walked out of my bedroom into my small hallway with just a bathroom and a closet. Then to the right is the living room. It just felt safer to be away from that window. Moments later, before I returned to my bedroom or really did anything, I heard a noise. I was standing in the hallway, and there were a few sort of loud banging noises from my bedroom window. It seemed like possibly the man was going to try to break in. I heard several more loud bangs on the window, and I worried that it would break. I walked over to my door and left my apartment, going into the hallway. Then I called the police. I told them about what happened and said that I thought a man was breaking in. While I waited for the police, I went to the lobby of the apartment building near the front. I felt much better being away from my unit. The police got there minutes later. They searched my apartment and behind it. When I returned to my place, I saw that my window was actually broken and the man had gotten in. Several things were messed up. I was also missing several items. However, the man was able to escape before the police got there. At the end of the day, I was just glad that I left before he broke in. With the window being broken, I went and stayed at a friend's house for the night. The window got repaired the next day. Though I'm mad about having several of my things stolen, it was not even $100 worth of stuff. I am, however, sort of concerned that something like this will happen again. I still live in the same apartment, but luckily, nothing like this has happened since. A few years ago, I used to play video games and stream them online. I was not really popular or anything, I just did it for fun. I would stream on Twitch for my friends, and usually anywhere from 1 to 3 or 4 of them would watch. Sometimes they would play with me in the games as well. Every now and then a few other random people would watch the stream too, but I never got more than like 10 viewers at once. I wasn't trying to become famous or anything. One night, I was streaming Fortnite. It was almost a nightly thing for me to do at the time. I was playing with my friend Luck, who was also watching the stream. I remember that at one point, I saw there was another viewer, and soon the new viewer started talking in the chat and leaving comments. I did not recognize the username to be any of my friends, and I realized it was a new person. I said hi to them and welcomed them to the stream. The person responded, saying hi, but a short time later, their comments turned bad. It started with basic insults, calling me names and cursing at me. I assumed it to be some teenage kid just messing around on a Twitch account. I remember asking on the stream why he was so angry. My friend was thinking that it was really funny, though. The comments then got threatening. The user said something like they were going to find me and they knew where I lived or something along those lines. Obviously, I didn't take the threat very seriously. I really had no idea why they would act this way because my stream was always pretty fun and lighthearted. The first comment the person made that really raised my eyebrows, though, was when they mentioned my real name. They said they knew my name, and when I asked what it was, the user commented it. This shocked me because my name was not my username or anything. and this person knew my last name as well. It was then that I figured it had to be one of my friends messing with me, and that's what Luck thought as well. I remember Luck asking who it was, going through a list of friends that he thought it could be. The person denied it all. After going back and forth for a bit, the person eventually left, and I ended the stream a short time later. But the very next night, the person was back. I went back on what I usually did and was playing Fortnite again. Luck also joined, and it was just the two of us like the night prior. Well, maybe 30 minutes into the stream, the mystery person returned. They started commenting again, picking up right where they left off, but this time they said they were going to my house. I was kind of like, okay, buddy, let's see it, and still not taking it seriously. They went quiet in the chat for a while, but then out of nowhere, the person commented that they were at my house. Then I heard this loud knocking coming from the front door. I lived in a house that I rented with a roommate during this time. My roommate was gone at work, and I was at home by myself. After I heard the knocking, I told Luck about it, who seemed shocked. This definitely had to be a friend, I said. I was getting up and went over to go look. After leaving my bedroom and starting to enter the living room, I could see somebody through the front window. There was a man standing on the front step who was wearing all black and a ski mask. He did not resemble any of my friends, but I guess it could have been one of them. I just had a bad feeling about it, though, like this was somebody else. I went back into my bedroom and asked the guy through my stream what he wanted. He did not respond to this, but loudly knocked again on the front door. I was not going to answer it. The mysterious man then made a comment that he hated my car. I don't know why he said this, but then he left the stream. I really had no idea as to what was going on. Me and Luck talked about who it could be, and I told him that I thought it was someone totally random. Luck was telling me that I should go out and confront the guy. Eventually, I left my bedroom to go check, but the guy was gone now. I looked out of every window and didn't see him. Well, the next day, I was leaving for work. When I got to my car in the driveway, there was a big dent in the driver's door, like somebody had hit it with something. I remembered the comment the guy made about hating my car, which is a Pontiac Aztek. Now I knew none of my friends would go so far as to damage my vehicle. After that, I decided to stop streaming for a while. I told all my friends about it, and like I expected, none of them knew who it could be. It remains a mystery to me to this day. I don't live in that house anymore. I did stream on Twitch again a while after it happened, but the guy never joined another stream or at least never said anything. This is one of the craziest things that's ever happened to me. At night, I like to play video games as a hobby quite a bit. This is my scariest experience while doing so. I remember that I was playing online on some game with random people. I had a headset and would talk to them. Most of you know that in online gaming, people sometimes say some crazy stuff, but on this night, it seemed pretty tame. I remembered towards the end, shortly before I would go to bed, I was starting to get tired. I was playing this one game with basically just one other person. It was a man, and we were talking about the game over our headsets. During the game, I remember he asked me some somewhat personal questions. I didn't think too much of it and figured that he was just making conversation. The things he asked me were what my name was, to which I only gave my first name, and where I was from. I only told him my state, and I'm pretty sure I asked him the same questions back, but I honestly don't remember his answers. There wasn't anything really that creeped me out or anything. There were maybe a few more questions, but nothing that stood out. I remember that after a while, I got tired, and I told him that I was getting off. I do remember him asking why, and I said that I was going to bed. Afterwards, he sent me a friend request on the game, which was not a big deal. But it was either the following day or the day after that, he sent me a friend request on Facebook. I did not know it at the time, though. When I would go on Facebook, I would accept most friend requests unless it was clearly a bot. This guy appeared real, and I accepted it, not knowing who he was at all. He started to message me a short time later. I remember he said hi and asked me what I was doing and stuff as if we were friends. I asked him who he was and he responded, saying we had played video games together a few days earlier. That's when I realized this had to be the same guy. Obviously, I had no idea what the guy looked like. When I heard this, I was surprised that he had found me on Facebook. I never told him my last name or the city that I was from. It kind of creeped me out. Plus, based on the guy's page and photos, he did seem pretty weird. I decided at that point to delete him as a friend. But the day after that, the guy followed me on Instagram. He then started messaging me there. He asked me why I deleted him and sent me like 4 other messages. When I saw them, I deleted and blocked him from Instagram as well. I thought that was the end of it, but a couple of days later, I got a text message from him out of nowhere. An unknown number texted me. When I looked, I figured it was a wrong number until the texter said their name, and it was a long, angry text about how I blocked him and stuff. This creeped me out more than anything. I blocked his number and hoped that I would stop hearing from him. Obviously, I deleted him from being friends on the game as well. After this, I did stop hearing from him. I still wonder, though, how he found me. I mean, the only thing he had to go off of was my first name and state. How did he find my number? My only thought is that he possibly messaged somebody who knew me on Facebook, claiming that he was my friend and wanted to know my number or something. I never asked around, so I can't confirm it, though. Either way, it's really creepy what he did, and I'm glad that I haven't heard from him since. It took place back when I was in high school. I was, I believe, a junior during this time and loved to play video games. I had a good friend at school named Noah, who I would game with almost on a nightly basis. We would hang out all the time as well, and he lived just a few blocks over. On this night, we were playing video games online on our PlayStation 4s. I was at my house, and he was at his. We had headsets so we could talk to each other as we were on. I remember that after playing for a while, Noah said, "What was that?" It kind of came out of nowhere, and I assumed that he was just talking about the game. I asked him what and he didn't answer me at first. Then all of a sudden, he said, "What the," and it kind of abruptly went quiet. I heard some other noises but couldn't make them out. I didn't know what was going on. I asked Noah what he was doing, but he did not answer me. Everything was silent for a while. After, I sent Noah a Snapchat asking him what that was all about. I was really confused, but Noah did not immediately open it. So, I got curious and was kind of concerned. I decided to walk over to his place. Maybe he was playing a prank on me, but I felt like I should go ask him. We were such good friends, and it wasn't that weird for me to do that. So, I left my house at whatever time it was, probably like 10 p.m. It was dark out, and after walking a few blocks, I arrived at Noah's street. It was quiet, and we both lived in a pretty typical neighborhood for the most part. When I reached Noah's house, I wasn't sure if his parents were home or not because most of the lights in the house appeared to be off. I walked up to the front door and knocked on it. At first, there was no answer. It was very quiet. But a short time after knocking, I heard what sounded like somebody who may be in the backyard. After waiting a while, I knocked again. I couldn't see into the backyard from where I was. I continued to wait at the front door, wondering if I should investigate the noises I had heard in the back. Maybe Noah had gone outside, but I didn't really know why he would. Then finally, I heard someone walking towards the front door inside. The door then opened, and Noah was standing there. He looked very serious and told me to come inside quickly. I got in, and then he closed and locked the door. He said a man had been inside his house, and he was calling the police. He added that he thought the man just left. Noah went back and got his phone from his bedroom and dialed 911. He told me that his parents were gone, and he was home alone. We both waited for the police in his parents' room because it had a lock on it. Nobody else entered the house or was in it while we waited. The police got there shortly after and spoke to us. I guess what happened is when I was gaming with Noah, he heard a noise from behind his house. It sounded like the back door, which led to the kitchen, was opening. It must have been left unlocked or something because an unknown person did, in fact, enter. After hearing the footsteps, Noah ran to his closet to hide. He was able to hide but did not have his phone and couldn't call the police. Then I must have heard him running to his closet, and he said that he completely forgot about me on the headset. The headset was also not wireless, so he had to take it off to hide in his closet. While hiding, he heard the person walking around inside of his house. He hid all the way until I arrived at his place. When he heard the knock on the door, he said the man started walking around quickly and then left the house. I realized that I must have scared the guy off by knocking on the door. Noah was grateful to me for doing so. He then was able to leave, lock all the doors, get his phone to call the police, which was on the floor near his bed, and let me in the house. I don't know why the man entered the house or how he seemed to know that the door would be unlocked, but I'm really glad that I went over to Noah's. So recently, I had an experience while I was at a friend's house alone, watching his dog, that inspired me to do another Home Alone themed video. I spent so much time reading stories of people's horrific experiences that I forget these things could happen to me too. In a bit of a different fashion, I'll tell that experience I had after the viewer submitted stories at the end of the video. A more positive experience I would also like to talk about is my experience with Scentbird, a fragrance subscription service that allows you to choose new designer fragrances to try out every month at an affordable price. You get to try the first fragrance from Scentbird for only $8, and your next month will be only $16.95. The vials are cheaper than a lot of the rollerballs or travel sizes you'll find elsewhere. Scentbird is a great solution for beginners in fragrance looking to experiment with certain scents. Scentbird allows you to try different designer fragrances from brands like Prada, Gucci, and Versace with a 30-day supply of any fragrance you choose. This way, if you're just getting into building your fragrance collection, you can test out what you like and what you don't without having to purchase a full bottle. Through Scentbird, I found my favorite scents, Eros Flame by Versace, which mixes Italian lemon, pink pepper, and vetiver for a classier scent, and Cross River Gorilla by Sanctuary for a more casual scent. So if you're looking to start your own collection, head on over to Scentbird by scanning my QR code using code 55nightmare to get 55% off your first month at Scentbird. Growing up, I was raised in rural Michigan. There was hardly anything to do, If you like staring at trees and crops and lots of alone time, that was the place to be. I got out of there as soon as I got a car and enough money to move. I'm not a nature hater or anything, but I'd pick being by a big city any day. My parents don't own that property anymore. They sold it 5 years ago. But to describe it, it was a 3-acre property. The house itself was pretty big, and there was a storage building out back. I was 13 when this happened. My parents would leave me alone often at this age. They trusted me because I matured at a young age and I had responsibilities on the property. It was a weekend, and I was playing Vice City on my PS2 in the living room when suddenly, a loud metallic bang came from outside somewhere in the yard. I right away ran to every window I could to look outside to see if I could see something, and I didn't see anything until I got to the window looking out the storage building out back. The door to it was completely open. I went immediately to grab the rifle from the closet and go outside. I made my presence known, shouting, "Who's in there?" to no avail. When I got to the door, I made it known I had a gun before looking inside. There was a bunch of stuff in there, from the sit-down mower to the quad to infinite little lawn care items. Someone could have been hiding behind any of that stuff. Even as a kid, I didn't scare easily, but at that moment, I got really unsettled. So I closed the door to the building and went back inside the house. I locked the door and then sat at the window for the longest time, watching the storage building, expecting the door to open at any second. That door was heavy and impossible to just open by itself. It was simply a fact that someone came and opened it. Whether they were still inside of the building, I wasn't sure. I decided to go call my dad and ask his opinion. I went to the kitchen to the landline phone and called my dad's cell phone. He didn't pick up, so I left a voicemail. This was back when you'd still have to leave someone a voicemail because texting wasn't mainstream. After that, I went back to sitting next to the window, but now I put on a TV show in the background to make this less monotonous. I took the phone with me. I was probably about to give up when I heard creaks from upstairs. My heart was now in my throat. I had to ask myself the big question: was I working myself up or was someone here? I had a serious guard dog mentality. Even if I didn't love that place, I saw it as mine, my family's. I had to protect it, but I was in over my head. I grabbed the rifle again and walked upstairs. I didn't say anything. Calling out would only make a potential intruder know that I heard them. I made it to the top of the stairs and I turned on the light for the upstairs hallway. There were 5 doors to open, all of them closed. 4 led to bedrooms, 1 led to the bathroom. Each door had a decently large crack underneath that would allow you to see looking out the crack under the door where the creak in the ceiling came from the side of the house my parents' bedroom was on. I got down on my knees and looked under the crack of the door. I saw 2 bare feet facing the other side of the door. I felt my stomach twist into a knot. The reality of the situation just became so much more real, and I realized I wasn't ready to threaten or, God forbid, shoot someone. I got up and quickly went downstairs, hiding in the bathroom to call my dad. He still didn't pick up. I left another voicemail and then called again and again. He never picked up. He must have had his phone set down somewhere. I finally called 911, as I should have done right away, and I whispered into the phone the whole time, detailing exactly what was taking place. I was told to sit tight in the bathroom and not say a word. I heard footsteps coming down the stairs, and then they approached the bathroom door as if whoever it was somehow knew I went straight to the bathroom. The footsteps stopped outside the door, and there was a brief pause before a deep voice said, "What's up, kid?" I still remember the voice and those words so vividly, if I heard that voice today, I'd still recognize it immediately. I almost wanted to cry, that's how scared I was. I disobeyed what the operator told me and spoke. I said loud and clear, "I'm on the phone with the cops right now, and I have a gun." I put the operator on speaker as she was asking me if everything was okay. The man attempted to open the door, and when he realized it was locked, I heard him walk away. I heard the footsteps fade to silence, and then the sound of a door slamming. It was the sound of the back door, I'm sure. I breathed a sigh of relief, and from there on, I waited for the police to arrive. When they did, I felt like £1,000,000 had just lifted off my shoulders. After a thorough inspection of the house, inside and out, confirming that the man was gone, they asked if there was anywhere else I could stay that night, and I said yes, my uncle's house. We contacted my uncle, who came and spoke with the police, then he took me back to his place. The thing that haunts me the most is that it was my fault. I could have prevented this. I left the door unlocked as I went to the storage building to investigate. Clearly, that's when the man simply walked right into the house. Even with a rifle in my hands, I didn't feel safe at all. It was truly the most horrific experience of my life. I was home alone one night for a reason I don't remember. All I remember is my entire family was gone. I was 13 or 14 years old. I was a big gamer at the time. I was obsessed with StarCraft, and admittedly sometimes spend a weekend night or two playing StarCraft or some other PC game. This was right before co-lockdown started. I was playing StarCraft on my computer in my bedroom on the first floor. That's when the doorbell rang twice. I hurried to the door, not wanting to be away from the game for too long, in fear of losing. I got to the front door and said, "Who is it?" as I always would if I was alone. A soft and weak voice on the other side said something that I couldn't hear. It sounded like a woman. I opened the door with the storm door still separating me and this older woman standing on the other side with a big smile on her face. She had her hands behind her back. I said through the door, "Can I help you?" She said she needed to use a phone and asked if she could come inside. Ever since I was a little kid, I was always taught not to let a stranger into the house, ever. That included women. I felt so awkward, though. I didn't know how to turn her away. I redirected her to the library a few blocks down because they'd surely have a phone. Deep down, I knew the library was closed at this point, but I was just trying to get this stranger who was trying to get into my house to leave. She was still smiling, but what she said next did not match her smile. She said, "That's very rude to turn away an old lady asking for help." I replied the only way I could think to, and that was that my parents don't allow strangers into the house. It's a house rule. I slowly started closing the door as I was saying sorry, and she just stood there, not moving, but still smiling at me. And though her smile never changed, it suddenly felt much more menacing. I was walking back to my room when the doorbell rang again. There was no way in hell I was opening the door again. That woman radiated weird vibes from the start. Maybe something was wrong with her. Maybe she wasn't all there. These were things I had no way of knowing, and maybe that was selfish of me to send her on her way, but I just wasn't opening the door for anyone when I was home alone. I went back to my game, not too long after I sat back down. I heard something tapping on the window. It was a clinking type sound from something metal. The window was directly in front of my desk. I had the blind pulled down, so I couldn't see what was making the noise, but I already had an idea. My room was the only room with a light on in the house. The horrible thought that it was the old woman from just before, and that she walked over to my window, terrified me. I turned off the sound on my computer at this point. I didn't care about my game anymore. The clanking sound on the window persisted. I basically said, "F this," and up and left to a different room in the house. I sat in the darkness of the living room for a bit. When the doorbell rang again, this woman was harassing me now. I tried to convince myself she wasn't a threat, just some crazy old woman who's probably clueless as to where she is. When she rang the doorbell a second and third time, I decided to go open the door and ask her if there's someone I could call for her, but when I opened the door there was now a man on the other side. He looked to be about 10 years younger than her. He said through the storm door, "Have you seen my mother?" I replied saying yes, she came to my door just before. He then apologized to me and said she has dementia and got out of the house. I suddenly felt bad, but he asked me if he could come in for a minute. And again I felt awkward. Why did he need to come inside? I said the same thing that I told to the woman who he claimed to be his mother. I said we could just talk through this door. I then said that I think she went into my backyard because I heard something at my window. I told him he could go around back and check. He thanked me and walked down the walkway, and I thought he went into the backyard, but when I went to the back and looked out the back window expecting to see him searching around, I saw nobody, not him or his mom. This was all too weird for me. I went to bed on the earlier side that night, just falling asleep with the TV on in the background until I heard the clear blinking sound on the window again. Something metal was tapping on the glass. I remembered the concerned man and I decided to try and help. I went to the window, lifted the blind up with my hand, and I saw that woman outside my window with that same creepy smile. She was tapping a kitchen knife on my window. I closed the blind and crawled back into my bed. This didn't feel like it was actually happening. A suspiciously short amount of time later, the doorbell rang like 4 times. The clinking onto the window stopped by this point. This was all too suspicious. It felt like some kind of robbery attempt. I ignored the doorbell. I stayed in my bed. I was going to wait this out. I didn't have a cell phone at this time. I wasn't the most social guy growing up. I also didn't want to call the police for some reason. I waited this all out until it finally stopped. The next morning I told my dad what happened. When I called him, he told me I was smart not to open the door. Everyone agreed that everything about it sounded like an attempted robbery. Is there a chance that maybe that woman really did have dementia and that the man was really her concerned son? Maybe. But it all seemed too coordinated. Why did he want to come into the house too? How did he even know she came to my house specifically? Why didn't he ever go into the backyard to look for her when I gave him permission to do so? Too many unanswered questions that lead me to believe I avoided something terrible happening if I opened that door. This happened to me just a bit over a year ago. I'm 24 and have a townhouse in the suburbs. I live alone, which for me gets really boring, so I try to have friends over whenever I can. My closest friends come a couple of times a week and sometimes even sleep over to escape their parents' houses. I didn't have any plans this night, but I had plans for the next day with my friend Adam, who was supposed to be coming over to have a movie night. So I really was just trying to get this night over with and looking forward to the next day. I went to bed early, like 9:15. In the middle of the night, I woke up. I looked at my nightstand and saw it was 2 a.m., but the way I woke up was odd. My heart was pounding for some reason, and my brain was very alert and aware, like something was happening. I thought maybe I had just woken up from a nightmare or something until I heard a click from downstairs. I sat up. A door slowly screeched open, and I could hear someone's footsteps entering my home. Although terrified, I thought this had to be Adam or one of my other friends, as they all had keys to my house in case they needed somewhere to stay. I got up from my bed and walked over to the door, opening it and stepping into the hallway. Adam, no one responded. I waited in the hallway for what felt like forever, but then a bright light suddenly flickered on, lighting up the whole downstairs. A second later, soft chattering noise came from the living room. Whoever it was had turned on the TV. For a moment, I felt relief, thinking it was definitely one of my friends who had one too many drinks. I went down the stairs and into the living room and felt my whole body turn ice cold in an instant. Some random man was sitting on my couch, looking at the TV screen. He looked maybe 50 years old with patchy long black hair and dirty clothes. As I stared at him in fear, he glanced over at me and showed a crooked smile, then waved his hand as if to invite me over to the couch. I turned around and sprinted right out the front door. I banged on my neighbor's door until they let me in and called the police. By the time they made it, though, he was gone, no trace of him at all. What's worse is the police didn't take it all that seriously, suggesting it was probably just some harmless homeless man wanting a place to sleep. The way I see it, everything points to otherwise. He picked the lock on my door, sat on my couch, and turned on the TV. Then the sick man smiled at me and invited me over to the couch. I think he may have been a stalker or something, and now I find it hard to even sleep at night when I'm alone, thinking that there's a chance that I'm not really alone. My wife and I take yearly vacations to different places. It's our way of taking a break from regular everyday life as well as getting to spend some quality time together. This year, we had a cabin booked in Washington State. It was far out and described online as being quiet and peaceful, away from any other places or people. Most of our life is in crowded cities, so this sounded great for us. When we flew in, we walked to a grocery store to pick up what we needed, then took a taxi out to the cabin. We didn't rent a car because we knew we'd only be there for 3 days, so we wanted to spend it just at the cabin. If we changed our minds or needed anything else, we could always just order an Uber. The taxi ride was just over an hour from the town we landed in. Most of the drive was between huge mountain ranges and tree-covered landscape. It was really beautiful and got us both excited for our stay. Then at just about 7 p.m., we arrived at the cabin. It was completely alone in the middle of the forest. Even the driveway leading to it wasn't much more than some tire tracks in the dirt. We got out, paid the taxi, then brought our stuff inside. The cabin itself was small. There was the main floor that had the kitchen and living room, with a ladder leading up to a loft area that had the bed in it. The bed area on the loft was short, though. You literally had to crawl into the bed, kind of like one you'd see in a tiny home. Anyway, we unpacked the groceries and made a very quick dinner since we were tired from the flight. Then we opened a bottle of wine to settle in for the night. We lit up the fireplace and chatted about how we were looking forward to the next few days. It was around 11 p.m. at this point, and as we talked, we both suddenly heard something outside. Someone was walking in the grass near the cabin. It was loud too, like they were really close. My wife looked nervous, so I tried to put a brave face on and told her it was fine. I got up and looked out the window. It wasn't until then that I realized how dark it had gotten outside. I looked around, seeing nothing but large trees everywhere and pitch-black darkness around them. I told her I didn't see anyone, then went over to the front door and opened it, stepping onto the porch and turning on the outdoor lights. All I could really see out there was a small portion of the driveway, but I didn't see anyone there either. The forest was very calm and quiet too, so if they were still walking around, I felt like I would have been able to hear them. I went back inside and asked my wife if she heard the footsteps anymore, but she said the sound didn't seem to fade out. It just stopped suddenly from somewhere behind the cabin. My brave act was starting to fall through, and I told her to go up to the loft and stay quiet while I figured out what was going on. I went around and checked all the windows again, not seeing anything. So, I went back to the front door. I was preparing myself to go back outside when a sudden thump shook the cabin. I looked up at my wife, who was looking up at the ceiling. Someone was on the roof of the cabin. I stayed inside and called the police, going over lengthy directions on how to get to the cabin we were at. Over the course of the hour that we had to wait, we could occasionally hear a few footsteps walking across the top of the cabin. About 45 minutes into the wait, though, we heard their boots hit the ground, followed by them calmly walking away. I looked out the window once more, seeing their outline disappearing into the forest. Police took our report and gave us a ride into town, where we spent the rest of our vacation. What that person was doing miles away from civilization in the middle of a forest is terrifying, seeing as they were likely waiting for us to either go to bed or go outside. We're just thankful that we got out of there before something else could have happened. This happened shortly after I turned 15 years old. As a birthday gift, my parents had given me an Xbox. I was even given my own monitor, which allowed me to play in my room. My room was upstairs, and in the weeks after my birthday, I of course spent a lot of time up there. It was a Saturday night. I was talking in an Xbox party chat with two of my school friends. Both of my parents went out of town at a work convention for the weekend, so I was home alone. I had my headphone volume pretty loud, but during a pause in our conversation, I heard a thumping sound come from downstairs. If you've ever been home alone as a kid, you'll know that any abnormal sound gets your mind imagining the worst. I turned down the volume and took one headphone off my ear. Nothing happened for the next 5 minutes, but shortly afterward, I heard the same noise again. I told my two friends about it this time, and they both encouraged me to go check it out, joking how someone might have broken in. I laughed and agreed to do it during the next break in our game. When that came, I took my headphones off and started walking towards the stairs. I began walking down them, and as I did, I began to hear soft whispering. I was only halfway down, but I completely froze up. I intently listened, trying to make out whether what I was hearing was actually real or not. Eventually, I crouched down to get a look into the living room. There, I saw 4 fully grown men, all completely covered in black, silently walking around. I genuinely couldn't process what I was seeing. All I knew is that I had to get back upstairs. I slowly started crawling back up them, and of course, one of the steps let out a loud creaking noise that echoed throughout the house before returning to silence. There was no way they didn't hear it. Thinking quick, I ran to my room, put on my headset, and told my friends to call the police to my house. They sounded confused and now in a serious tone asked what was going on. I didn't feel like I had enough time to explain, so I just told them to hurry and threw my headset down on my desk. I knew that locking myself in my room would be an obvious sign that I was inside. I still locked the door and closed it behind me, but instead, I hid in the bathroom further down the hallway with the light off and the door slightly cracked open so that they wouldn't think to check it. I could hear multiple sets of boots slowly walking up the stairs as I sat in silence. They kept getting louder until I could hear banging on my bedroom door down the hall. Not banging like trying to get my attention, whoever was doing it was clearly trying to break down the door. Voices started yelling out, saying things like how I needed to open the door if I didn't want anything bad to happen to me. I was absolutely horrified. I got up and started desperately opening the bathroom window. I guess I'd made too much noise because a set of boots started heading down the hall just as the bathroom door fully opened. I managed to dive out of the window head first. I landed badly on my neck but still managed to look back up at the bathroom window. A silhouette stood motionless, looking back at me. That's when the backyard door slid open, and 3 men came running out towards me. I tried getting up to run, but I couldn't in time. All 3 of them started grabbing me and pulling me back towards the house, but this was interrupted by the distant sound of police sirens. The 3 of them stopped and looked up at each other. They then sprinted to the backyard fence, climbed it, and I never saw them again. A few moments later, the police showed up in the backyard. I told them which way the men had gone, to which a couple of them started off in that direction while another stayed with me. The only man that was caught that night was the one inside the house. The other 3 that ran were never found. As police were asking me questions, my 2 friends who I was playing Xbox with pulled into the driveway on their bikes. Even to this day, I still routinely thank them for calling the cops, as it likely saved my life. Found left behind in the house were 4 different knives and a couple of fully loaded pistols. When I was 12, the dawning of a new millennium took place on New Year's Eve. While people were fearing the worst with the Y2K bug or out partying and drinking, I was home alone. In 1996, my parents had split up and from there, they divorced. My mother and I moved across the country from Oregon to Tennessee with her best friend. On the eve of the year 2000, I was home alone and my mother was currently out of state. Now, this didn't worry me as this was not the first time. I often came home to find a note on the kitchen counter saying that they had gone to Florida for a few days and that there were groceries in the fridge. Since the divorce, she was habitually leaving me alone for long periods of time to go to Florida. We lived on a relatively quiet road surrounded by trees and set a few miles out of town. I knew most of the people, if not by name then by face, enough to wave and have a small chat with. I had never been given a reason to be afraid of being alone. On the night in question, I was staying up late watching television. I remember I was watching the movie His Bodyguard on the USA channel, and I had most of the lights on in the house. Not because I was afraid, but because at 12, I wasn't concerned with the electricity bills or even saving the environment. I felt completely safe and protected within my little bubble of home. As I was watching the movie, I kept hearing these weird sounds outside, but I remember thinking it was probably the neighbors. Though they weren't extremely close, a couple of them were having a party or people over for the holiday. About halfway into the movie, however, the power in the house suddenly went dead. I sat on the couch for a minute, just sort of in a panic daze because it was near midnight and pitch black. I remember thinking the power must have gone out and that it would come back on, so I just decided to sit on the couch with my blanket and wait. A few minutes passed by when I heard a noise in the kitchen where the back door is. My heart started racing in my chest because I thought it sounded like the back door being shut. The back door sits just off of the dining room, which is connected to the kitchen and leads directly into the living room where I was currently sitting on the couch. A few seconds passed after I heard the sound, and I was straining my ears to pick up anything that wasn't supposed to be there. Every noise suddenly felt magnified. When footsteps sounded on the floor, I immediately slithered off of the couch onto all fours, crawled around the ottoman, and started, as slowly and as quietly as I could, to make my way toward the space between the love seat and the couch. I knew I could fit under the side table and be completely hidden by the dark and the ottoman from playing hide and seek in the dark many, many times with my friends during sleepovers. I was nearly there when the footsteps became more apparent. I knew from the sound of them that whoever it was making their way through the kitchen now toward the living room. They weren't hurried or anything, it was just like they were moving around in the kitchen. I glanced up from where I was crouched on the floor, and to my horror, there was a dark silhouette standing in the doorway between the two rooms. To my credit, I didn't scream, however, I did panic. I stood immediately to my feet from my hiding spot and I ran down the hallway. I believe the only reason I wasn't grabbed by now is because the person chasing me had to get around the ottoman in the dark to follow me. I did what all children would do when they're afraid. I bypassed the front door, the guest bedroom, the bathroom, and I ran to the farthest door down the hallway, my room. In all honesty, I probably wouldn't have been able to get the front door unlocked and open in time as it was right off the side of the couch. As I ran into the room, I slammed the door shut and locked it. However, the lock was simply one of those little turn knobs that you can easily pop with a butter knife. I had barely gotten the door shut and locked and the person on the other side knocked on it. I have no idea why they knocked, if they did it to mock me or to scare me, but I knew in my heart that my little lock was not going to keep whoever it was on the other side out of my room. It didn't keep my mother out when we were arguing, and it certainly wouldn't stand up to brute force. I was panicking and on the verge of tears when the person started laughing. That after he had stopped, though being under my bed gave me no feelings of being secure. I didn't come out from under it because I simply had nowhere else to go. I thought about trying to go out the window, but I was afraid he might expect it and therefore be waiting for me on the other side. It was also several feet off the ground as the house was built on a raised foundation. I remember laying under my bed, terrified, for what felt like hours. At some point, I must have fallen asleep because I awoke the next morning to daylight. The fear of what had happened came back to me as soon as I registered where I was and why. Scared that whoever had been in my house might still be there, I decided to crawl out the window and run to a neighbor since it was daylight outside and therefore I felt less afraid. Crawling out this kind of window was a lot harder than it looks, and I did it less than gracefully as I was not, and still am not, the most coordinated person. Once I was back on my feet, however, I carefully made my way around the house. That's when I noticed that the back door was wide open. Scared but feeling braver now that I was outside and that it was morning instead of pitch black night, I walked back up the steps and started peering inside. Seeing nothing out of the ordinary, meaning no terrifying man leering at me basically, I decided to go inside. Looking back, I cringe at how stupid this could have turned out, and I wish I would have told my younger self to make the smarter move and just go get help. But thankfully, no one was inside the house. I did a terrifying, heart-pounding room-to-room check, looking in closets and under beds, behind the couch, and anywhere I thought even a small child might be able to fit. I even popped the lock on my mom's bedroom so I could check it, and then relocked it afterward. When I was positive there was no one there, I went back to lock the back door. I had left it open in case I needed to escape, and I noticed that the breaker box on the opposite wall was open. The main switch had been pulled. I flipped it back on, locked both locks on the back door, and checked all the windows and front door. Then I called my mom, where I once again broke down crying hysterically. She called a coworker, who came and stayed the entire day with me as they drove back. My mom still took random trips to Florida after that, but I always went with her from then on. All started with a camping trip. Me and my girlfriend, let's just call her Lee, were young and dumb, blissfully unaware of the cosmic curveball life was about to throw our way. Picture this: crisp mountain air, crackling campfire, the Milky Way sprawled across the velvet darkness. Textbook postcard perfect. Except the postcard ripped in half when we woke up the next morning, disoriented, clothes rumpled, and with a gaping hole in our memories where the previous day should have been. We brushed it off as a weird shared dream, a glitch in the matrix, but a niggling unease settled in our gut, a premonition of things to come. Back in the familiar chaos of college life, things got weirder. Lee, normally the picture of health, started experiencing these unexplainable physical oddities, dizzy spells, nausea, heightened sensitivity to light. Then came the bombshell: pregnant. Impossible. She was on the pill religiously. The doctors were as confused as us, their tests revealing nothing out of the ordinary. Yet, as the weeks ticked by, the strangeness intensified. Lee's body became a battleground, her health fluctuating like a runaway roller coaster. 1 week she'd be glowing, energetic, the next, pale and listless. The baby inside her, meanwhile, seemed to be defying the laws of biology, growing at an alarming rate. The ultrasound session was disturbing. Before Lee and I knew what we were looking at, the technician ended the session. She seemed disturbed, leaving with no explanations given. Both Lee and I were beyond bewildered, bordering on desperation. My countless calls to the specialist's office only yielded the frustrating response, "The doctor is busy. He will call you back." But that call never came. Determined to uncover the truth hidden in those ultrasound images, I took matters into my own hands, parking myself near his car after his workday. The specialist was visibly shocked to find me there. There was no subtlety in my approach. I practically tried to force an answer from him. His bewildered expression shifted as he hesitated before urging, "Tell your wife to get an abortion." That's all I got from him, nothing more. His profound fear caught my attention. I couldn't fathom why he seemed so terrified about our baby's unusual condition. Then, the arrival of a black van nearby intensified his distress. His eyes fixated on it, and the fear seemed to double. As I left, deliberately passing close to the van, the driver's window lowered. 2 men in suits and sunglasses shot me an eerie look. As the doctor drove away, the van started up, following him ominously into the unknown. The fear gnawed at me, a constant unwelcome companion. It was this creeping sense of being watched, a feeling like unseen eyes were tracking our every move. Then came that night in the apartment. We woke up, not to the comforting hum of the fridge or the distant sirens of the city, but to a bone-chilling silence, broken only by the frantic thumping of our hearts. In the inky blackness, a presence loomed, unseen but undeniable, radiating an oppressive dread that seeped into our very bones. I am telling you, that night there was more than us in that apartment. Only the Lord knows what that presence was, but it felt otherworldly. We fled that night, seeking refuge in Lee's parents' house, the unease clinging to us like a second skin. That's when I started getting anxiously suspicious about the gap in our memories from the night out camping in the wild. The pieces started falling into place, the strangeness of that event, the unexplainable pregnancy, the constant feeling of being watched. They all pointed towards something not of this world. The doctor's frantic insistence on more tests, his desperate pleas for termination. What further fueled my suspicion was that the doctor always had excuses not to see us or kept the sessions ridiculously short, never giving any clear answers to any of our questions. To myself, I wondered if it was his way to punish me for the time I creeped up to him in the parking lot, or if he was hiding something from us, possibly both. This wasn't a normal pregnancy. This was something else entirely. God knows what. Lee, bless her heart, refused to listen. Motherhood blazed in her eyes, a fierce determination that trumped logic and fear. She was going to have this baby, no matter what the test said, no matter what dark secret it held. Eventually, I decided it's better to let her live her naive dream. Denial can be bliss. I was hoping that she was right. I was hoping it was merely me being paranoid. If the baby was abnormal, we would have it anyway if that is what she wanted. The climax arrived like a sucker punch. Lee went into early labor, the doctors acting frantic, their faces etched with worry. Then came those 2 men in suits, their expressions unreadable, barring my entry to the delivery room like guardians of some forbidden secret. It was like they were hiding something, something terrifying. When they finally let me in, it was over. The baby, they claimed, died during the procedure. We never saw the body. Some fabricated story about a mix-up, an admin error. A wave of relief washed over me, an undeniable sensation despite the crushing grief clawing at my insides, a hollow echoing in my chest. Lee was devastated. It was slow, but time heals all, and she recovered. The years that followed were a haze: marriage, 3 beautiful, normal children, a life built on laughter and love. We tried to build normally and succeeded to a large extent. And that is our story. Yet it does not end there. Sometimes I wish it did. Ignorance would have been a simpler path. Something was off. Both of us shared nightmares, became our unwelcome souvenir. We never spoke of them, but the knowing glances confirmed our mutual torment. Weeks of normalcy could be shattered by a single morning, both of us awakening as if we'd relived that night in the wilderness every time, both of us at the same time. Its synchronized nature was disturbing. These random nightmares could come at any time. It couldn't continue. When our youngest, barely 5, noticed our erratic behavior, his innocent question cut deep: why are mommy and daddy in such a bad mood some mornings? Desperate for answers, we confided in a trusted psychologist. He suspected suppressed joint trauma and referred us to a hypnotherapist and her practice partner. Our separate but simultaneous sessions with the two hypnotherapists uncovered the horror. It all came out, or most of it in any case, or so we believe. Gosh, I think we would have preferred the amnesia. The memories were horrific: the oppressive silence of the woods, the sudden blinding light that filled our tent, the feeling of weightlessness as we were lifted skyward, the colossal metallic craft hovering silently above. Then came the figures themselves, tall and slender with elongated limbs and skin that seemed to shimmer in the otherworldly light, their faces shrouded in shadow, radiating an unsettling calm. Their movements devoid of human emotion, their large almond-shaped black eyes, that is one thing that I can't get out of my mind since the regression sessions. And of course, those creepy six-fingered hands touching everywhere. The details were terrifyingly clear: the sterile examination rooms, the cold metal instruments, the unsettling hums and piercing screams. We were not the only ones. They forced us apart. They controlled our bodies and movement. We were taken to separate rooms where we endured unspeakable experiments. From me, they extracted samples, a primal instinct telling me it wasn't what later transpired with Lee. For her, they did something far more monstrous, invasive, and unbelievable, manipulating her body and planting the unwelcome seed of that child. We didn't know their motives, but had to endure their cold touch and emotionless indifference. Emerging from the therapist's office, we clung to each other, trembling, tears mingling with the bitter stain of confirmation. Those fragmented memories finally coalesced into a horrifying whole, confirming our darkest suspicions. We weren't just abducted, we were subjects in some experiment, unwilling pawns in their grand design. Regular therapy sessions became our battleground, where we wrestled with the horrific memories and lingering trauma. Despite the semblance of normalcy we rebuilt, the shadows of our experience clung to the corners, whispers of what if clinging to the air. But the heaviest shadow loomed large: the baby, the one we lost. The burden became unbearable, a weight threatening to crush us both. I embarked on a mission for answers, tracking down the retired doctor across state lines in a Sarasota restaurant. Years etched on his face mirrored our own. He unveiled the truth: the 6-digit codes on tiny limbs, the oversized head, the huge black eyes like bottomless voids. Each unsettling detail chipped away at our hope, while the revelation of its survival, spirited away by shadowy figures claiming government affiliation, plunged us into a new abyss of fear and confusion. There's more to the story, secrets too unsettling to share in the open, but one even if the answers lead us deeper into the darkness. My island on June 28, 1947, Captain Tony, who worked as a harbor patrolman officer in Island, was on patrol with his 2 rookies, his son, and his dog. However, this was no ordinary day at sea. When Tony gazed up into the sky from his patrol boat, he saw 6 aircraft floating around 1,500 feet above his watercraft. The objects were reported by Tony and his crew to be made of a reflective material and were shaped like flat donuts, about 100 feet in diameter. The center holes located on each craft were noted to be about 25 feet in diameter, and more circular objects were located along the sides of the aircraft, which Tony and his crew determined to be observation windows. Soon, Tony and his fellow crewmen noticed that 5 of the UFOs circled over the 6th, and the 6th itself was lowering towards the patrol boat. This caused immense panic among the crew because they all thought that the aircraft was going to collide with their patrol boat. Not wanting to be sent to a watery grave, the crew hightailed it toward the shore. Upon reaching the shore, Tony retrieved his binoculars to spot the bizarre aircraft from the shore. He also grabbed his camera to take photos as evidence of the strange aircraft. While taking the pictures, the lower craft stayed in a still position while the 5 others circled around it for about 5 minutes. Then, the lower aircraft suddenly dropped down but stopped abruptly at about 500 feet above the water. One of the 5 ships circling around the lower ship came down to meet it. The 2 crafts stayed in this position for several minutes until Tony thought he heard a thump. Instantaneously, more thumps followed, and Tony, using his binoculars, saw that the middle aircraft was dropping what Tony suspected to be newspapers from the inside of its center hole as it swiftly approached his watercraft. When the aircraft got close enough, it was discovered that the objects weren't newspapers but instead white, lightweight metals and black, lava-like rocks. Tony even stated that when the lava-like rocks landed in the sea, it caused the water to steam. With these dangerous pieces of debris falling ever closer to their boat, the crew sought cover below deck. However, not before one of the materials struck Tony's dog, killing it in the process, and another one wounded his son in the arm. Tony even tried to radio for assistance, but the transmitter wasn't functioning. Even though his radio was out of action and no help was on the way, most of the debris splashed into the water. Soon after the raining of metals and rocks, the airships rose up high into the sky and zoomed westward together. The crew then exited the lower deck and examined the boat for any damage. Luckily for the crew, the boat was hardly damaged, and they set sail back to their dock, lowering the dog over the side and into the water in the form of a burial at sea. Upon docking, Tony took his son to the hospital so that his wounds could be treated and afterwards explained the incident to his boss, Mark, who didn't believe Tony. When the photos Tony took of his patrol were printed and examined, the strange airships Tony had informed him of and showed him in the now-developed photos were compared and believed to be film noise and damage caused by radiation. Not wanting to shy away from proving the incident's authenticity, Tony returned to island to collect rock samples in hopes of finding the ones dropped from the middle aircraft that he had encountered during the incident. Tony reported that while he did this, he spotted one of the aircraft hovering above him as if it were spying on him. He eventually gathered the rocks and was preparing to show them to his boss the next day. But when that day came, he was visited by a small, pale man in a black suit. The man suggested that the pair of them should get breakfast together, to which Tony agreed. So, he followed the stranger to a restaurant. While they ate breakfast together, the strange man asked no questions but instead gave a descriptive account about what Tony had witnessed the previous day and eventually warned Tony that bad things would happen not only to him but to his entire family. Men then acknowledged that Tony had been telling the truth. So, the pair of them sent a package to publisher Ray Palmer in Chicago, who later founded Fate magazine. The contents inside the package were the metal fragments and statements about the strange incidents and findings on the 21st and 22nd of June, a noteworthy incident that we continue to discuss and debate amongst ourselves to this day. Yet not even a month later would another incident occur that is possibly the most well-known and talked about alien encounter in history, Roswell. On July 8, 1947, in the small town of Roswell, New Mexico, there were reports of a flying disc that crashed into the desert not far from the Walker Air Base. This made front headlines around the world. The reports noted that bodies of aliens had been retrieved from the crash site and were hauled to the infamous Area 51 Air Base in the Nevada desert, where autopsies were performed and carried out. Shortly afterwards, a press release by high military authorities stated that rumors of a flying saucer had become something of a reality and that an intelligence officer at the Roswell Army Airfield was fortunate enough to gain and hold possession of one of the saucers. This statement sent newspaper reports of the incident around the world insane, and news headlines of this Roswell flying saucer were everywhere. However, Just 24 hours later, that high military authority changed their story, stating that they had made a mistake and that the flying saucer was actually, in fact, a weather balloon. Unbelievably, the public appeared to have accepted this explanation, and very little was said about the Roswell incident for many years afterwards. It wasn't until the late 1970s when some military personnel involved began to speak out about what happened all those years ago, and ufologists, as well as conspiracy theorists, went into overdrive, thus developing the Roswell case into the incident as we know it today. One of the first military personnel to speak out about the Roswell UFO incident was Major Jesse Marcel. He was one of the 2 military personnel sent to investigate the crash site. The other one who was with Major Jesse Marcel was Sheridan Cavett, who had always claimed that he wasn't even there. Major Jesse Marcel described how large amounts of metallic debris were scattered all over the area, so the craft had obviously hit the ground at a high speed. He stated that it was clearly not a weather balloon, aircraft, or missile because he recovered fragments from the crash and described seeing hieroglyphic types of writing painted on it. The metal was also reported by him to be light, thin as paper, but incredibly strong and hard, which was unlike anything he had ever seen in his career and life before. He also helped answer the question as to where the fragments were taken by simply saying not only did they have the one he analyzed but others as well, which are being kept well preserved in a military installation somewhere. Marcel's story doesn't end there, however, because later in life he told his expanding family about his investigation at Roswell. According to his grandson, my grandfather Marcel would privately share details of his experiences with the entire family. And when I was a kid, basically around the dinner table, he told us how he was the head of intelligence and lead investigator of the 509 bombing group. He would talk about it with people, continuously asking a multitude of questions about the Roswell UFO incident. The National Security Agency published a report in 1994, a staggering 47 years after the initial incident, which stated that the alien bodies supposedly recovered from the crash site were, in fact, just life-size test dummies. Many saw this as the government just trying to dig itself out and cover up the situation, which only continued to fuel conspiracy theories. Lots more witnesses came forward and spoke out about the Roswell UFO incident, including a photographer who claims that he was asked if he could photograph the crash site. He explained how he was asked to take photos inside a dark-tinted area, where he observed 4 identical bodies with humongous heads and shadowy skin. After taking the pictures, he was debriefed and ordered to forget everything he noticed at the crash site. But then a witness more credible than everybody else combined spoke out just before he passed away in 2005. His name was Lieutenant Walter Haut, the man who published and released the original weather balloon report back in 1947. Before his passing, he wrote and left a sworn affidavit in which he claimed that the weather balloon story was a cover-up for the UFO that had been successfully recovered from the crash site. He also confirmed that he had seen dead alien bodies in this still widely debated Roswell UFO incident. With these 2 incidents raising so much speculations and questions, one might ask if we will ever know what went on. However, as the years fly by and as the people who were involved or witnessed these incidents pass away, we are really only drifting further away from the inevitable answer. So until the government sheds light on this mystery or the next incident does that for us, we can only continuously marvel at the fact that these 2 instances combined have been not only the gateway to extraterrestrial debates as we know them today, but also might just be the biggest government cover-ups in history regarding human contact with alien and otherworldly beings. Though these 2 events are the most widely renowned encounters with extraterrestrials, thousands of encounters have been reported throughout the world to the present day. I never told anyone this story because I never thought they would believe me. I was home alone one evening and had gone to sleep for the night. I lived with my significant other and 2 indoor cats, but she was out of state traveling for business.